A vast, quiet landscape of trees stretches out beneath a cloudy sky. Katia thanks her companion for assisting Clara, and he suggests stopping at a checkpoint for a much-needed break. They gently set Clara down on a rock, exchanging mutual gratitude and sighs of relief. The protagonist gazes out at the scenery, remarking that it is a beautiful view he hopes to properly enjoy once their troubles are settled. As he rummages for food, he notes the girls are used to this view, while Katia adds that everyone yearns for things to settle down. Katia explains she gathered water-rich fruit beforehand, fearing they might not find water sources further ahead. The group sits together in a circle and formally begins their meal with a traditional phrase of gratitude. Yu asks Clara about the route while eating, noting the fruit hydrates the throat well despite its weak flavor. Pointing down the slope, he confidently identifies the location of a village lying just ahead. He murmurs the word village thoughtfully, his mind clearly drifting elsewhere. Yu begins to mentally analyze the potential social structure, architecture, and clothing materials of the society they are about to enter. Katia interrupts his thoughts with a teasing smile, accusing him of fantasizing about local food ingredients again. Although Yu tries to deny it, Katia insists she knows the truth because he always wears a specific smile when thinking about cuisine. She praises his passion, remarking that his love for food has been the key to their survival and joy. Yu blushes at the compliment, admitting he is often called strange but feeling happy to be understood. Katia encourages him to stand tall and teach the villagers his cooking methods, certain they will be astonished by the taste. Moved by her support, Yu promises to prepare a magnificent feast for everyone once they reach the village safely. With their morale restored, Yu beams a bright smile and suggests they resume their journey immediately. A massive shadow suddenly falls over the party as a dragon descends from the sky. Yu stares up in shock, cold sweat breaking out on his face as he processes the colossal threat. Clara trembles in terror, barely managing to whisper the word, dragon, as she freezes in place. Katia's eyes widen in horror as the beast lands, its sheer size dominating the clearing. The dragon's vertical pupil narrows sharply as it locks its predatory gaze onto the group. Katia screams for them to run, but Yu shouts back that they must stand and fight. She looks at him in utter disbelief, but he remains rooted in place with a fierce expression. Yu yells that they cannot escape a creature like this and must fight to win if they want to live. He flashes a strained but confident grin, trying to reassure her despite the overwhelming odds. Yu explains that fleeing from a dragon is futile, stepping forward to fulfill his duty to protect them. He argues that fighting gives them a 50% chance of survival, whereas running guarantees 0. Radiating intense determination, he asserts without a shred of doubt that they will defeat the monster. Katia questions the logic of his without a doubt claim but finds strength in his unwavering resolve. She realizes they are making up forced excuses to be brave, but she smiles and accepts the challenge. Crouching low in a combat stance, Katia urges both of them to give the battle their absolute best. The dragon unleashes a deafening roar that shakes the forest and signals the start of the conflict. The beast spreads its massive wings and hovers, while the pair steel themselves for the inevitable clash. Weapons drawn and eyes burning with defiance, Yu and Katia charge forward to engage the dragon in a fierce battle for survival. The dragon looms ominously over the pair, forcing them to acknowledge the grim reality of their situation despite their previous brave words. Katia turns to Yu with a trembling smile and desperately asks what their actual plan of action should be now that the enemy is here. Yu decides to take the vanguard to distract the beast, reasoning that his defensive capabilities are superior to hers. Katia protests that such a reckless strategy is far too dangerous for him, even if his defense is technically stronger. Staring down the monstrous threat, Yu grimly admits to himself that he cannot think of a better strategy to ensure their survival. He accepts the risk as necessary, pained by the duty to protect a civilian but seeing no other viable option to keep them alive. Yu begins to object to the label of regular civilian, but his thought is cut short as he focuses on the impending battle. Clara suddenly interrupts his concentration, calling out his name with a serious and determined expression. She hands him a weapon she crafted long ago, realizing he needs it to stand a fighting chance against the dragon. Yu recognizes the weapon immediately as a spear crafted from the horn of a dirk. He reaches out and firmly grasps the weapon, confirming with a nod that he is ready to use it. Clara explains that she used her magic to strengthen the grip, though she worries her contribution might be of no use against such a foe. She admits that this enhancement is all she could do, standing by his side as he prepares to face the impossible. Yu grips the spear tightly and smiles warmly, assuring her that he has no choice but to give the fight his absolute best. The dragon lunges forward with terrifying speed, its massive claws tearing up the ground where they just stood. A deafening roar echoes through the forest as the beast asserts its dominance over the battlefield. Yu executes the plan immediately, shouting for Katia to look for an opening while he draws the monster's attention. Giant claws smash into the ground as Yu and Katia leap in opposite directions to evade the lethal strike. Yu barely avoids a crushing blow, the dragon's massive frame looming over him as he maneuvers through the chaos. He taunts the beast with a fierce shout, declaring that he refuses to lose this battle. Locking eyes with the predator, Yu steels his resolve and swears internally that he will survive this encounter. He spins his spear and proclaims that he will be the one to eat well and live on in this world. Katia realizes that the mana from his high-quality food has reacted with his spirit to grant him explosive magic power and amazing strength. She yells that they might actually make it, warning him to keep his guard up as he confronts the enemy. Yu activates his allure and hardening skills, his body and weapon glowing with magical energy as he prepares to engage. The dragon bellows a furious roar, accepting the challenge as the human charges straight at it. As he closes the distance, Yu's eyes widen with the realization that the dragon is faster than he anticipated. He narrowly evades a sweeping claw attack, twisting his body in midair to avoid being crushed. Yu maneuvers under the beast, noting that its giant body far surpasses even the size of the dirk he previously fought. With a grunt of effort, he slams his hardened spear against the dragon's massive claw, blocking the strike in a shower of sparks. Yu strains against the overwhelming pressure of the dragon's claws, gritting his teeth as he barely manages to block the strike with his spear. Sweat pours down his face as he realizes that in his current precarious position, taking another direct blow would be absolutely fatal. Katia leaps into the fray with a fierce cry, swearing she will not let the beast harm her companion. She swings her weapon with all her might, unleashing a powerful slash that tears into the dragon's massive leg. As she lands, Katia clicks her tongue in frustration, realizing that despite her effort, the cut she inflicted is far too shallow. She quickly calculates that her current magic power is sufficient to cut through the dragon's scales, confirming that victory is theoretically doable. Yu observes that while they landed a hit, the dragon reacts with terrifying speed, having thwarted his attempt to strike a vital spot. He stares intently at the wound on the beast's flank, reasoning that the fact it can be injured proves it can be killed. Yu's gaze sharpens as he notices the fluid leaking from the wound, murmuring in surprise that dragon blood appears to be red. A dark, hungry smile crosses his face as he admits he is glad it is red, noting that blue or green blood would not be nearly as appetizing. Katia winks at him with a knowing smile, remarking that his obsession with food remains unchanged even after they have thoroughly angered the beast. The dragon looms over them with a menacing aura, its sheer size casting a shadow that forces the pair to steel themselves for the next clash. Yu flashes a confident grin and asks if they should continue with their current strategy, to which Katia agrees with a determined shout. The massive beast glares down at the insects beneath it as Yu and Katia split up, dashing in opposite directions to confuse their opponent. A thunderous roar erupts from the dragon's throat as it snaps its jaws furiously at Katia, who flinches but holds her ground. Yu immediately activates his allure skill, bathing himself in a magical aura to forcibly draw the dragon's lethal attention away from Katia. The dragon turns its head and unleashes a devastating breath attack, forcing Yu to face a torrent of destruction with a strained smile. A massive explosion of dust and debris erupts where Yu stood, but a small sprout appears in the crater as he narrowly escapes the blast. The dragon swipes its claws with incredible speed, tearing through the air and forcing Yu to dodge frantically to avoid being bisected. Yu locks eyes with the predator, his senses heightened to the limit as he tracks the dragon's every movement to survive. He realizes with cold clarity that for any ordinary beast, that single attack would have spelled the end, and he sweats at the sheer force behind it. The dragon pauses for a moment, its vertical pupils narrowing as it assesses the surprisingly resilient prey that refuses to die. Yu screams for Katia not to pull back, urging her to press the attack despite the overwhelming danger of the situation. Katia charges through the lingering smoke and flames, her sword drawn and eyes focused as she closes the distance with reckless abandon. She lands safely and thanks Yu for the save, realizing that if either of them had been a split second late in their reaction, they would be dead. Katia analyzes the dragon's breath attack, noting that while it burns briefly, it is hot enough to melt steel and create a living hell. Yu grimly admits that his hardening skill likely wouldn't protect him from that heat, and Katia looks concerned about their lack of defense. She worries if their current hit-and-run tactics can continue working against such an adaptable and powerful monster that dominates the battlefield. Yu crouches and strategizes, realizing that while he can dodge effectively, supporting Katia while she closes in for an attack changes the difficulty entirely. He glances over at his companion and silently decides that he must change his approach if they are going to survive this encounter. The group realizes the intelligent dragon has memorized their attack patterns, prompting them to turn that predictability into a weapon. Despite Katia's frantic refusal due to the danger, Yu insists on taking the bait role to create a blind spot opening for her strike. Yu presses the issue by stating their survival hangs on this gamble, convincing her that hesitation will only lead to their mutual destruction. He calculates that his enhanced physical abilities combined with the twin-bladed deer horn sword will grant him the power to pierce the dragon's scales. A critical problem remains in his plan, as he realizes simply dodging isn't enough when the dragon launches a devastating counterattack. Since he cannot evade immediately after a counter, he identifies a crucial element necessary to force the attack through despite the risk. To survive, he commits to a philosophy of one strike, certain kill, aiming to eliminate the opponent before it can make a next move. He stakes his life on the biological fact that creatures in this world share the same fundamental anatomy as animals back on Earth. His confidence stems from the extensive knowledge gained by butchering and dressing various beasts, revealing the universal truths of flesh and bone. Memories of dissecting prey flash through his mind, reinforcing his understanding of where vital organs lie beneath the skin. He gambles everything on the hope that even a legendary dragon follows the same biological laws as the mundane creatures he has dismantled. Identifying the target, he aims for the location where the heart should be, assuming the dragon's anatomy mirrors that of a deer or boar. Focus narrowing to a single point, he convinces himself that penetrating that specific spot in one blow will yield a fatal result. As the dragon snaps its massive jaws, Yu drives his weapon forward, shouting as the blade finds its mark. Gritting his teeth, he pours every ounce of his strength into the thrust, desperate to break through the creature's defenses. The twin-bladed sword pierces through the tough exterior, sinking deep into the dragon's chest with a sickening crunch. Disaster strikes as the blade halts midway, stopped cold by a muscle layer far denser than he anticipated. The dragon looms over him with a terrifying glare, leaving Yu to accept that his gamble has failed. Resigning himself to death, he finds a moment of bitter peace in knowing he gave the fight everything he had. Katia's face twists in sheer horror as she watches the tragic scene unfold, tears welling up in her eyes. Darkness consumes the moment as a brutal impact shatters the tension, sealing the grim fate of the encounter. A blinding white void follows the destruction, leaving only a haunting silence in the wake of the violence. A guttural sound escapes the dragon's throat, signaling that the beast remains standing despite the desperate strike. A devastating beam of energy annihilates the area, consuming everything in its path with blinding ferocity. The smoke clears to reveal nothing but scorched earth and rising ash where a person once stood. Katia screams Yu's name in anguish, her mind flooded with the memory of his gentle smile amidst the rain. Overcome with grief, she collapses as the reality of the loss crashes down upon her in waves of despair. Kneeling in the dirt before the remnants of the battle, she stares in disbelief, her spirit breaking under the weight of the tragedy. Fury overrides her sorrow as she screams her refusal to accept this outcome, her magical power flaring to life. She clings to the image of Yu as the cheerful symbol of life and food, rejecting a world where he no longer exists. The dragon looms over the smoldering crater, prompting an urgent whisper to move fast before the beast recovers. The ground suddenly erupts in a violent explosion of dirt and rock, shattering the tension of the battlefield with dynamic force. Yu bursts from the earth screaming in panic, terrified that the massive blast had actually killed him. He lands heavily near the trees, shocking Katia, who stares in disbelief at his miraculous survival from the dragon's breath. Composing himself instantly, Yu crouches low and locks his gaze on the enemy with renewed determination. Katia calls out his name, her voice trembling as she processes the reality that he is still alive and ready to fight. Yu shields her from the dragon, and though she questions how he survived, her tears flow from pure happiness. Yu asks for a distraction, and Katia immediately steps up, declaring that explanations can wait until after the fight. She swallows her fear and steels her expression, shifting her focus entirely to the dangerous task of holding the line. As Yu sprints to flank the beast, Katia brandishes her massive sword and confidently yells for him to leave the defense to her. Yu races through the grass with his spear as Katia vows to purchase every second of time he requires for his plan. Her fingers tighten around the hilt of her blade, channeling all her strength into the impending collision. She charges fearlessly at the dragon, shouting to know exactly how much time she needs to buy for his strike. Yu cuts off her bravado by shouting a precise demand for 30 seconds to prepare his final attack. Katia centers herself, standing firm as the dragon's massive claw swings down to crush her into the earth. A sense of awe washes over her as she intuitively grasps the incredible nature of the power unfolding around her. With a burst of speed, she intercepts the attack, her blade clashing against the dragon's strike with impressive force. She maneuvers through the air to deflect the beast's fury, creating the crucial opening Yu needs to advance. Yu shakes off his hesitation, realizing he cannot waste the precious opportunity she is fighting so hard to provide. He focuses inward, awakening a swirling torrent of power within his body that he once believed was inaccessible. His arm swells with unnatural energy, transforming into a massive limb as Katia watches the phenomenon in shock. He bellows her name to signal the attack, warning her to clear the path for his decisive blow. Roaring with exertion, Yu launches himself forward and drives the empowered weapon straight toward the dragon. The tip of the spear slams into the dragon's chest, the impact radiating shockwaves as it struggles to breach the scales. The barrier gives way under his amplified strength, and Yu drives the blade deep into the dragon's flesh. Katia gasps in awe as Yu lands in a crouch, his weapon buried completely within the beast's chest. Yu looks up to see the massive creature freeze, a torrent of dark blood erupting from the fatal wound. A guttural shriek escapes the dragon's maw as its strength fails and its massive bulk begins to topple. The earth shakes as the titan crashes down, leaving Yu standing victorious with his weapon in hand. Silence descends upon the battlefield as the dragon lies motionless, its reign of terror brought to a sudden, violent end. Yu stands dazed in the aftermath, his mind barely grasping the reality of his survival as the dust settles. A scream of pure triumph tears from his throat as he fully realizes he has accomplished the impossible task. Katia stares in utter disbelief that their tiny group survived, while Yu hesitantly asks if they truly won. He checks himself and is astonished to find that, against all odds, they have sustained no visible injuries. Katia begins to tremble uncontrollably, her composure crumbling as the adrenaline finally leaves her body. She breaks down completely, sobbing with overwhelming relief as she cries out that everyone is still alive. Yu watches her emotional release, his expression softening as he understands the depth of her fear and relief. He kneels to comfort her, admitting he had his own doubts but emphasizing that everyone is safe now. With a gentle demeanor, he encourages her to channel her overflowing emotions into a smile rather than tears. Katia pauses in her sobbing, struck by the warmth and kindness of his unexpected advice. Yu beams at her with a bright, genuine grin that dispels the lingering shadows of the battle. Her eyes widen as she focuses on his face, the terror slowly melting away to be replaced by peace. A radiant smile finally breaks through her tears, reflecting the pure joy of survival and connection. She looks up with a renewed spirit and gives a resounding affirmation, accepting the happiness of the moment. Katia voices her pent-up questions about the battle, demanding answers now that the dust has finally settled. Yu notices her intense curiosity and smiles, ready to address the mysteries surrounding their survival. His attention shifts to the carcass, as he admits he is far more interested in the culinary potential of the dragon than the fight itself. As he slices into the flesh, he marvels at the moist texture and the unexpectedly sweet, aromatic fragrance rising from the raw meat. He realizes that dragons are omnivores rather than strict carnivores, barely containing his excitement at finally tasting the legendary meat. The group deduces that the dragon's diet of mana-rich plants infuses the meat with flavor, effectively making it a natural herb beef. Despite the massive size of the beast, Yu notes with a critical eye that there are surprisingly few edible parts available. Lacking proper utensils, he decides to boil the shank for broth, noting that the limbs are far too tough for direct consumption. Katia presses for answers about the battle, specifically asking how he survived a direct hit from the dragon's devastating breath. She emphasizes the lethality of the conflagration from hell, admitting she was certain he had died within the inferno. Yu reveals his desperate gamble involved creating foam, utilizing the air trapped inside the bubbles as a shield against the heat. He explains the scientific principle from his world where tiny bubbles in urethane foam act as effective insulation because air conducts heat poorly. Though he admits he wasn't sure if the foam alone would save him, Katia listens intently to the logic behind his survival. Shifting topics, Katia questions the sudden awakening of his charge ability, noting that previous attempts to activate it had failed. Yu recalls the moments of desperation where he gave everything he had, feeling a sudden surge of power that convinced him success was possible. He muses that the awakening might have been connected to the specific weapon he was wielding at that critical moment. The double-bladed Dirk Horn sword resonated with him, feeling like a natural extension of his own body when he activated the power. While Yu believes the sword was the key, Katia finds herself understanding the true nature of his power even less than before. Yu adds that his habit of eating well and storing up mana likely played a crucial role, but his comment causes a sudden shift in Katia's expression. He looks confused as Katia stares at him in bewilderment, questioning his casual remark about mana storage. Yu clarifies his belief that eating usually just heals and recovers mana, not increases it. Katia explains that eating to increase mana is as futile as trying to overfill a vessel with water, leaving Yu perplexed. Katia insists that food cannot increase the capacity of the vessel itself, identifying what he describes as actual growth. She details that increasing absolute mana volume normally requires harsh training that pushes the body to its absolute limits. Katia confirms that increasing mana capacity through food alone is theoretically impossible, leaving Yu stunned. Yu realizes with a jolt that his ability breaks the laws of this world, essentially making him a badass with a broken skill. Katia nods silently, confirming that his unique constitution defies the standard magical rules she knows. He understands he possesses an overpowered skill where eating grants him accelerated growth and power, overshadowing his detection abilities. The revelation leaves him reeling, realizing he genuinely doesn't understand the full extent of his own anomalous existence. Katia smiles warmly, reassuring him that she likes him despite his strange abilities, admitting she had always found them odd but kept quiet. Yu looks down with a humble expression, taking silent comfort in his friend's unwavering acceptance of his bizarre nature. A gentle, grateful smile spreads across his face as he sincerely thanks them for their support. Changing the subject, the elf girl curiously asks if the explosive fire from the dying dragon's neck was another one of his skills. Yu praises her sharp observation, explaining that a spark from his blade likely ignited an internal powder-storing organ. Pushing the heavy conversations aside, Yu pumps his fist into the air and enthusiastically declares that it is finally time to eat. Katia and the elf girl beam with pure joy, excitedly agreeing that they have been waiting all day for this exact moment. Contemplating his rapidly evolving abilities, Yu realizes his powers will likely grow to unprecedented heights. Looking warmly at Katia and the elf girl, he decides he is perfectly satisfied as long as he has good friends and delicious food. A mouth-watering aroma drifts through the forest as Yu proudly announces that their grand feast is finally ready. Unveiling the massive slab of cooked meat, he cheerfully declares that dragon steak is on the menu today. Katia and the elf girl stare at the masterpiece with wide, sparkling eyes as a collective gasp of pure awe escapes their lips. Grinning confidently, Yu explains that the steak is grilled medium rare with simple spices to perfectly seal in its rich juices. Lamenting the lack of proper utensils, the young chef asks the girls to wait while he cuts the massive slab into bite-sized pieces. Gripping his makeshift carving knife, Yu excitedly prepares to slice into the legendary ingredient. The sharp blade slides smoothly into the seared crust, revealing the incredibly tender and juicy flesh hidden within. To his absolute amazement, Yu notices the cooked meat is somehow even softer than when it was completely raw. He marvels at the sheer quality of the dragon steak, feeling practically zero resistance as the knife glides effortlessly through. Presenting a beautifully plated mountain of sliced steak, Yu enthusiastically tells his starving companions to dig in. Overwhelmed by the luxurious sight, the elf girl notes that such incredible food is enough to make a person's heart sing. Seeing her deep appreciation, Yu flashes a proud, satisfied smile as the group's anticipation reaches a fever pitch. Gathered tightly around the blazing campfire, the triumphant trio eagerly claps their hands and offers a unified thanks for the meal. Wasting no time, Katia aggressively chomps down on a massive chunk while the elf girl delicately tastes her first magnificent bite. Yu's eyes widen in sheer shock as the explosive, savory flavor of the legendary beast instantly floods his taste buds. He quickly analyzes the complex flavor profile, noting that the rich fat never feels cloying thanks to the natural herbal notes. The perfectionist chef slightly regrets his inability to craft a matching sauce to elevate the salt-enhanced umami even further. Savoring the exquisite texture, the elf girl admits this incredible delicacy surpasses anything found in a high-end restaurant. She playfully complains about the wooden fork altering the taste, prompting you to agree that proper utensils would have been ideal. Staring at her half-eaten skewer, the elf girl laughs at the absolute absurdity of enjoying a gourmet feast right after facing certain death. She tilts her head back with a blissful sigh, accepting that eating a stray dragon in the mountains is a remarkably precious experience. A profound realization washes over her as she tastes the unique, untainted meat of an apex predator that never feared being hunted. Experiencing such a divine meal ignites a powerful, insatiable hunger within her to discover and taste even more exotic foods. An intense, unspoken understanding passes between the elf girl and Katia as their culinary ambitions instantly align. The elf girl's serious expression quickly melts into a soft, genuine smile as she turns her attention back to the generous cook. Caught completely off guard by her sudden shift in demeanor, you pauses mid-chew and asks what she needs. Holding out her empty plate with a slight blush, she politely asks for seconds while you happily encourages her to eat her fill. A cheerful Katia instantly pops into view demanding another serving as well, prompting you to laugh and invite them to eat everything. Heavy, labored breathing echoes through the trees as the group pushes through the final stretch of the dense forest. You notices Clara's exhaustion and offers to carry her on his back, urging her not to hesitate if she needs help. Clara steadfastly refuses the offer, looking up with determined eyes as she insists on walking on her own 2 feet. You accepts her resolve with a gentle smile, respecting her decision to finish the journey under her own power. He advises her not to push too hard and to ask for breaks, ensuring she doesn't collapse right before the finish line. The trio continues their trek through the woods, Clara stumbling slightly but pressing forward with you and Katia close by. Clara gasps as the trees break, pointing ahead with a trembling finger as Katia confirms their destination is in sight. Tears well up in Clara's eyes as she gazes upon her village, the sight of home overwhelming her after the ordeal. You smiles warmly at her reaction, encouraging her to keep moving for just a little longer to reach safety. As the village draws closer, you feels the heavy weight of tension lift from his shoulders, replaced by a profound sense of relief. He closes his eyes and exhales, realizing that the desperate struggle for survival where they lived or died by the moment is finally over. Katia looks down at the peaceful settlement with a serious expression, noting that the real hardship for Clara might only be beginning. Shaking off the somber thought, Katia puts on a bright smile and marches forward, signaling the group to enter the village. The vast, open sky stretches above the town, marking a peaceful transition from the suffocating danger of the Dragon's Mountain. A furious roar breaks the silence as Clara's father screams at her, calling her a fool for entering the mountains alone while she sobs. The villagers whisper in shock that she survived, while you watches the scene with a wry smile, having expected this exact reaction. One villager scolds her for worrying everyone but admits that having a place to return to is a blessing in itself. A man approaches you and Katia amidst the commotion, asking if they are the adventurers who saved the girl. You confirms their identity as the man and woman introduce themselves as Rosie and Recita, Clara's parents. The couple stands before them with solemn expressions, the weight of their gratitude evident in their posture. As Clara wails in the background, her parents bow their heads, struggling to find words adequate to express their thanks. They bend deeply at the waist, their voices trembling as they declare that no amount of thanks could ever be enough. You humbly deflects the praise, telling them that it was actually their daughter's hard work that helped the group succeed. Later inside a quiet room, you sighs about how intensely he got chewed out by the village elders during the debriefing. Clara smiles weakly across the table, admitting she feels relieved despite the scolding, while you agrees it was truly life or death. She shudders as she recalls the terrifying darkness of the mountains, confessing she would have been crushed by fear if she were alone. Turning to you, she reveals that it was his cooking that gave her the courage to endure the terrifying nights. She describes the dishes as warm and nostalgic, crediting that comfort with keeping her spirit from breaking under the pressure. A bright smile lights up her face as she thanks you again, admitting she would have starved without his knowledge of what to eat. You blushes furiously at the praise while Katia teases him, insisting he should be more proud of the strength his food provides. You announces he must report the dragon kill, prompting Katia to reveal her sudden plan to return to Moira. A heavy silence descends as Yu calmly states his intention to head straight for the perilous Badlands. Katia freezes, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock as the weight of his destination sinks in. Yu explains that he has no home to return to in this world, making a journey into the unknown his only real option. He admits that he hasn't been able to get the Badlands out of his head ever since she first mentioned them. A grin spreads across his face as he notes that where others see strong monsters, he sees only delicious untapped ingredients. Reflecting on his past, Yu realizes he never had a passion or hobby that anyone else could truly admire. He resolves to use the one skill he has, cooking, to hunt down ingredients that no one in this world has ever dreamed of eating. Silence fills the room as the magnitude of his new ambition hangs in the air between the three companions. With burning conviction, Yu declares that his true dream is to search out and devour the unknown flavors of the world. Katia stands up abruptly with a loud scrape of her chair, cutting him off with a sharp look that signals deep emotion. She confesses that her time as a temple knight left her with horrific memories of the Badlands, making her dread his choice. Despite her trauma, she smiles warmly and vows to support his dream simply because she is his friend. She offers to handle the complex travel permits, demanding in return that he promises to prepare thoroughly before entering the wasteland. A quiet moment passes as Katia looks at him with a gentle expression, her decision to help solidifying the bond between them. Yu turns his attention to the silent girl at the table, asking Clara what path she intends to take now. Katia warns Clara that the Badlands allow for no communication, urging her to speak her true feelings now or regret it forever. Clara looks down at her lap, her face twisting in anguish as she battles with her own hesitation. Yu notices her distress, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere as the girl trembles before him. Her hands ball into tight fists on her thighs, her body shaking as she steels herself for a life-changing confession. Tears streaming down her face, Clara screams her desire to go with him, swearing she will never be a burden again. Yu stares blankly, completely taken aback by the sheer intensity of her request to join his dangerous journey. She looks him dead in the eye, insisting that her words are not a spur-of-the-moment whim but a serious resolve. Clara reveals the secret of her origins, confessing she is a foundling who was never born in this village to begin with. She points to her silver hair, explaining it is the unique trait of a tribe that is supposedly extinct. Katia's eyes widen in shock as she whispers the name of the Mauru tribe, realizing the legend is real. She deduces that Clara's rare hair color and powerful healing magic are undeniable proof of her connection to the lost tribe. Katia stares at the girl in disbelief, stunned to find herself sitting across from a living, breathing fairy tale. Yu looks completely lost as Katia explains that the Mauru were an ancient people gifted in magic, leaving him in the dust. The atmosphere turns dark as Katia recounts how a king seeking immortality hunted the tribe down and inflicted terrible atrocities upon them. Katia reveals the grim fate of the Mauru tribe, explaining that the survivors fled into the unforgiving Badlands to escape the king's tyranny. The group processes the shocking information that Clara's ancestors sought refuge in a land where human survival is considered impossible. Clara clutches her skirt, reaffirming her love for her adoptive parents while acknowledging the harsh reality of her true heritage. She confesses that a quiet life isn't enough to silence the thorn in her heart, driving her to seek her true self by Yu's side. Yu is stunned as Clara stares at him with burning intensity, shouting her desperate plea for him to take her along. He asks if she has told her parents about this decision, and she hesitantly admits that she hasn't broken the news yet. Clara looks away in guilt, while Yu internally debates the risk of leading her into danger against the joy of her company. With a gentle smile, Yu agrees to her request, but lays down the strict condition that she must first get her parents' blessing. Tears well up in Clara's eyes as the tension leaves her body, replaced by a wave of overwhelming happiness. She lunges forward and wraps Yu in a tight hug, screaming her thanks while he flushes red in embarrassment. Yu frantically tries to remind her that the permission comes first, but his words are lost in her jubilant embrace. Katia watches the scene with a satisfied grin, noting that Yu's path has officially been decided. She shrugs nonchalantly, claiming she only gave the situation a little nudge to help them find their way. Taking charge, Katia orders Clara to focus on recovery and securing permission, setting the terms for their departure. She stands up and announces she will head to Moira's ahead of them to prepare for their arrival. Her expression softens as she prays for their safety, revealing the genuine affection beneath her knightly demeanor. Extending her fist, she declares that this isn't a farewell, but a promise to meet again on the road ahead. Three fists bump together in a silent pact, sealing the bond between the warrior, the chef, and the healer. They share a final look of determination, their smiling faces reflecting the hope and courage of their new alliance. The view shifts to the quiet mountains under a starry sky, signaling the end of the chapter and the start of a new journey to Moiras. You and Clara arrive in the stone-paved streets of Moiras, gasping in awe at the sheer scale of the city architecture. Clara questions if the city is truly that impressive, prompting you to confirm that Moiras is indeed a major urban center. Staring up at the stone buildings, you feels the weight of being in a foreign land, noting he has never seen such construction before. His excitement shifts immediately to his stomach as he enthusiastically declares his desire to explore the local food culture right now. Clara interrupts his culinary fantasies to remind him they have a task to do, but you suggest grabbing a meal before meeting Katia. She points out a critical flaw in his plan by patting his empty bag, forcing him to realize they are completely broke. You reveals his trump card, pulling out the massive dragon claws while admitting he has no idea of their actual market value. He confidently asserts that rare dragon items should fetch a high price, showing the pristine white claws to his companion. With a renewed sense of purpose, they agree to scour the city streets for a merchant capable of purchasing their monster loot. The elderly shopkeeper stares at the item in distress, apologizing profusely that his establishment cannot handle such high-value goods. You and Clara freeze in confusion, their expectations shattered by the merchant's unexpected refusal to do business. The merchant clarifies that buying even one would bankrupt his entire warehouse, shocking you who hadn't realized the item's worth. When you asks for a specific number, the old man reveals that a pair of claws would command a staggering 50 million hydors. Yu's mind goes blank as he calculates that such a sum represents enough wealth to buy out an entire jewelry store's inventory. Clara trembles as she processes the astronomical value, while Yu stares at the claw in his hand with newfound respect. Yu decides to sell just one claw despite the merchant's warning that he could get a better price elsewhere, prioritizing quick cash. The merchant bows respectfully and asks them to wait, disappearing into the back to gather the immense payment. Yu wanders the shop, realizing that his ignorance of the item's value stemmed from never seeing such high-level loot in his village. The merchant returns and places a heavy sack on the counter, thanking them for their patience as the transaction concludes. A mountain of gold and silver coins fills the bag, shining brightly as it represents a sudden shift from poverty to wealth. Yu and Clara stare at the overflowing bag with wide eyes, completely overwhelmed by the reality of their instant fortune. As the merchant suggests crafting the remaining claw into a knife, Yu looks down at his loot while considering the question. Yu blushes with intense excitement, his imagination running wild at the prospect of the new weapon. Walking through the narrow streets, Clara notes his high spirits, amused by his sudden shift in mood. Yu grins and admits that crafting a knife from a dragon's claw is a dream come true for him. A shady figure suddenly blocks their path, ordering them to stop with a threatening glare. The thug spins a knife and demands a cut of their money, attempting a brazen shakedown in broad daylight. Yu and Clara stare at the man with unimpressed expressions, showing zero fear in the face of his threat. With a deadpan look, Yu simply declines the demand, refusing to be intimidated by a common street thug. The criminal lashes out in anger, warning that they will regret resisting, but Yu mocks his confidence. Yu opens his mouth and unleashes a devastating roar of fire, channeling the power of the dragon. The street erupts in commotion as bystanders gasp, wondering what caused the sudden flash of heat. Yu wipes his mouth casually as the smoke clears, while Clara stands frozen in shock next to him. He looks down at the trembling thug, mocking the man's earlier threat with a terrifyingly calm smile. The criminal stares in horror, his eyes rolling back as the reality of who he messed with sinks in. Screaming that Yu is a monster, the thug flees for his life, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Yu snaps back to reality, realizing that using such flashy power will definitely summon the city guards. They panic and decide to bolt, agreeing to disappear before they are mistaken for a threat to the city. The camera pans down to the scorched pavement, the only evidence of the brief but intense encounter. Knights puzzle over the scene, unable to explain the dragonfire traces without any magical residue. Yu and Clara walk away innocently in the distance, playfully agreeing that the explosion is a total mystery. Yu and Clara stand before a dilapidated stone building, looking unsure as Yu asks if it's really okay to enter. Stealing his resolve, Yu pushes forward and decides they should just go inside and see for themselves. The door creaks open to reveal a chaotic workshop filled with weapons, causing you to gasp in awe at the sight. A rugged man emerges from the back room, scratching his head and demanding to know who is making all the ruckus. Yu explains that the bank teller Henry sent them, causing the blacksmith to click his tongue at another one of Henry's referrals. The blacksmith approaches with an expectant look, demanding they show him the special material if Henry actually sent them. Yu pulls out the massive white object, causing the blacksmith to scream in shock as he recognizes the dragon's claw. He demands to know where they got it, and Yu explains they hunted a stray dragon with the help of a cathedral knight. The blacksmith stares at them in disbelief, struggling to accept that two kids could take down a dragon even with assistance. Despite the lingering questions, he looks closely at their faces and decides that they don't seem to be lying. Grinning broadly, he declares he likes Yu and promises to craft a hell of a knife within a week. He tells them to come back in 10 days for a hefty surprise, and Yu bows in gratitude for the accepted request. Before leaving, Yu leans in close to the blacksmith's ear and whispers a request for a specific, secret function. The blacksmith bursts into laughter, amused by the boy's creativity and agreeing that it is an interesting idea. The scene shifts to the vibrant town square, where flags flutter overhead and the streets are packed with life. Clara stares in wonder at the bustling market stalls, her eyes drawn to crates filled with colorful and strange vegetables. Yu asks if she is enjoying herself, and she beams, admitting that the lively atmosphere makes her feel energetic. He reminds her that they still need to visit Katia, but suggests they take a moment to look around the market first. Yu agrees to the detour, realizing he will likely remember this vibrant scene for a long time. The sound of sizzling fat draws their attention to a grill where skewers of unknown meat are being cooked to perfection. Yu takes a bite of the skewer and is shocked to find that it looks like meat but carries the distinct scent of the sea. He analyzes the flavor profile, describing it as a delightful fusion of fish and meat that tastes like a sea monster. Pure bliss washes over him as he savors the delicious street food, completely lost in the culinary experience. Clara bites into a strange red fruit, finding the sour taste refreshing enough to make her want to buy one immediately. Yu examines a juicy vegetable that looks like a tomato, noting that it would be the perfect palate cleanser after a heavy meal. He closes his eyes and imagines the culinary possibilities, realizing he could likely create a tomato sauce with this ingredient. His mind conjures vivid images of chili shrimp pasta, his chef's instincts taking over completely in the middle of the market. Clara watches him with a knowing smile, noticing the familiar glazed look in his eyes as he stares at the food. She leans in with a gentle expression and asks if he is lost in thoughts about cooking once again. Yu looks back in surprise, wondering how she managed to read his mind so easily. Clara beams with a knowing smile, teasing Yu while his face flushes a deep red. Her fingers fidget nervously, betraying the tension and excitement bubbling beneath the surface. She shyly asks if their outing counts as a date, admitting her only knowledge comes from books. Yu stammers in a panic, his face burning as he awkwardly agrees that it might be something like that. Internally screaming, Yu tries to calm himself by rationalizing that a date doesn't strictly imply lovers. Desperate to change the subject, Yu points to a nearby stall and asks about the strange items on display. Clara pouts with a sigh, clearly annoyed that he dodged the romantic tension so clumsily. Yu picks up a lumpy nag fruit, marveling at the vendor's description of it being sweet and rich. The vendor grins at them, calling them lovebirds and offering a free fruit to the happy couple. Blushing furiously at the comment, they bite into the fruit while trying to ignore the vendor's teasing. Clara's eyes light up as she describes the delicate sweetness and sticky texture filling her mouth. Yu notes a hint of citrus flavor, learning from the vendor that the fruit grows naturally in dry regions. A lone woman watches the bustling crowd from the sidelines, her expression tinged with a quiet sadness. A groan echoes in the air as the culinary journey continues under the open sky. Yu pats his stomach and declares he has room for one more snack, asking Clara if she can keep up. Clara laughs nervously, admitting she is reaching her limit while Yu insists he can fit another bite. They wander into a quieter part of the market, spotting a lonely stall with no customers in sight. Yu approaches the woman sitting alone and cheerfully orders 2 servings to support her business. The woman smiles warmly as she serves them a steaming bowl of imoni, a simple potato stew. Yu clasps his hands together in thanks, ready to dig into the humble-looking dish. He takes a bite and freezes, a smile spreading across his face as he declares it absolutely delicious. Analyzing the flavor, he notes how the garum has soaked into the fluffy potato core perfectly. The shopkeeper beams with joy at their reaction, while Clara struggles to eat the piping hot food. Yu praises the dish's balance, explaining how the seasoning unifies the ingredients without overpowering them. Impressed by his palate, the woman asks if he cooks, noting his knowledge is beyond that of a normal customer. Her expression turns bittersweet as she reveals she is happy to serve them before closing her shop for good. Clara gasps in shock, asking if she really intends to shut down her business. The woman explains that her plain food doesn't attract young people, forcing her to throw away leftovers daily. Yu looks around the flashy market, realizing that humble dishes like imoni struggle to stand out against colorful street food. Staring at the bowl, he laments that the food is wasted simply because people won't give it a chance to prove its taste. Yu stares at the humble potatoes, musing that they need to create something specifically tailored to appeal to a younger crowd. A spark of inspiration hits him as he suggests adding a catchy side dish to grab people's attention, surprising the shopkeeper. Flags flutter above the bustling market, setting the stage for the culinary transformation about to take place. Yu rolls up his sleeves with determined focus, signaling his readiness to get to work and turn the situation around. He asks to borrow the kitchen for a moment, reasoning that the ingredients will go to waste anyway if they don't try something new. With practiced precision, Yu peels and slices the potatoes into thin, uniform rounds suitable for frying. He checks the temperature of the oil, smiling confidently as it reaches the perfect heat for his plan. The potato slices sizzle violently as they hit the hot oil, bubbling and transforming in the golden liquid. Yu turns to the women with a grin, assuring them that the process is actually quite simple despite the dramatic sizzling. Kneeling by the pot, he blows gently on a freshly fried chip, fulfilling a small personal ambition to cook like this. He lifts a golden brown chip with chopsticks, inspecting its texture and declaring it ready for the final step. With a flourish, he sprinkles salt over the freshly fried batch, seasoning them to perfection. He waits for the excess oil to drain away, ensuring the final product will be crisp rather than greasy. Yu announces the completion of his creation, presenting the world's most popular snack to the stunned onlookers. He offers the plate to the skeptical women, encouraging them to taste the creation that is unlike anything they've seen before. Clara takes a bite, her eyes widening in shock as the loud crunch echoes through the small stall. She exclaims that it's a completely new dish, marveling at the super crunchy texture while the shopkeeper looks on in disbelief. The shopkeeper calls him a genius for creating such a novel dish from simple ingredients like potatoes and salt. Clara playfully suggests stacking them to increase the flavor, unable to stop eating the addictive snack. The shopkeeper asks why he would go so far for a stranger, and Yu simply smiles, asking her to make this dish a staple. Yu explains that while it's a new discovery here, potato chips are actually a wildly popular snack in his home country. He details how the snack spread rapidly due to its simple yet addictive nature, becoming a common favorite. Images of happy families and children eating chips fill the narrative, illustrating how the snack is loved almost everywhere. Yu prepares to leave, stating his belief that good food has the power to last forever regardless of trends. The shopkeeper smiles with renewed hope, promising to treat them to a bowl of imoni the next time they visit. Yu and Clara wave goodbye as they walk away, leaving the shopkeeper with a new lease on her business. The old woman watches them go, a genuine smile replacing the resignation that had plagued her earlier. She immediately gets to work, loudly advertising the crispy, delicious potato chips included with every purchase. A man stops in his tracks, intrigued by the offer and immediately ordering a set with imoni. A crowd begins to form around the stall, drawn in by the smell and the excitement of the new treat. Yu and Clara walk away with satisfied smiles, looking back to see the once empty stall now bustling with life. Yu looks up at the imposing structure of the Zeo temple, questioning if this massive building is truly their destination. Clara confirms they are in the right place, explaining that the Temple of Moira's is famous while staring in awe at its grandeur. She confidently assures Yu that even if they aren't let in immediately, someone will surely come to address them. Two stoic guards stand like statues before the massive wooden doors, crossing their spears to bar the path. One of the guards looks down with a stern expression and demands they state their purpose for approaching the temple. Yu asks to see Kadia Faloa, but the guard is bewildered that he would refer to Kadia-sama so casually without an appointment. Yu and Clara freeze in shock, the weight of the honorific sama instantly signaling that their friend is far more important than they realized. Yu whispers to Clara, wondering just how high-ranking Kadia must be to command such respect from the temple guards. The guard explains that an audience with Kadia requires a written request and offers no guarantee of when or if a meeting will occur. He bows his head in apology, regretting that he cannot simply let them pass despite their request. Yu sighs and decides they will have to follow the formal procedures, turning away to draft a letter and wait. He suggests they find an inn to stay at for the time being, accepting that they have plenty of time to spare. They begin to walk down the stone steps, their backs turned to the temple as they plan their next move. A familiar voice stops them in their tracks, and Yu turns to see Katia rushing out of the temple in her full regalia. Katia beams with joy as she confirms it really is Yu and Clara standing there, relieved her intuition was correct. She hugs Clara, expressing her delight that she convinced her parents and admitting the days without them have been terribly boring. Katia suggests slipping out for a bit since she has nothing to do, though Yu looks concerned about her leaving her post. Her expression clouds over as she remembers a troublesome detail, but she pushes it aside to suggest visiting a store first. Yu notices the sudden shift in her demeanor and asks what is bothering her. Katia hesitates before revealing that she mentioned the dragon incident to her boss, the Zao archbishop. She drops the name Randall Dimitriasama and apologetically asks Yu if he would mind meeting with him for a short while. The guards behind her tremble in fear, bowing deeply to apologize for their earlier rudeness now that they know who Yu is. Katia sighs at their stiffness and orders them to raise their heads, noting that she rarely gets visitors anyway. She lectures them that while she is busy, accepting personal messages or meetings is not strictly prohibited. She chides them for being too rigid, instructing them to be more accommodating to guests in the future. Yu watches the interaction with a wry smile, noting that while the guards are unaccommodating, they are certainly enthusiastic. He defends the guards to Katia, reasoning that their strictness comes from a dedication to duty and reminding her that knights are human too. Katia smiles softly at his words, admitting she is glad that Yu continues to treat her as a normal person despite her status. They arrive at a set of ornate doors, signaling that they have reached the archbishop's chambers. Katia warns Yu to mind his manners from this point on, though Yu confidently replies that he is more reserved than he looks. Katia announces their arrival and asks permission for the guests to enter the chamber. The heavy double doors swing inward, revealing the expansive room beyond. Yu and his group walk silently down the long carpet toward the figure at the far end. They stop before the desk, waiting for the man seated there to acknowledge them. The man looks up, his eyes locking onto Yu with a flicker of immediate recognition. He welcomes them warmly, inviting the group to make themselves comfortable in his office. The man sitting behind the desk formally introduces himself as Randall Dimitrius, the Archbishop of Zao. With a polite smile, he immediately thanks them for defeating the dragon and saving Katia. Apologizing for the sudden summons, Randall hopes you will not take the abruptness personally. He assures the young hunter that he simply had a strong desire to meet him face to face. The Archbishop's expression shifts slightly as he notes that the conversation will now become strictly private. He politely asks the others to excuse them for a moment. Katia immediately steps forward, firmly accepting the order without hesitation. She formally assures the Archbishop that they will leave the rest entirely in his capable hands. A heavy, oppressive silence instantly descends upon the massive office. The sheer weight of the impending private conversation leaves the remaining guests completely frozen in place. Staring at the smiling man, Yu realizes the Archbishop radiates an entirely different, overwhelming aura. Despite his friendly demeanor, an undeniable sense of authority hangs thickly in the air. Narrowing his eyes, Yu silently evaluates the powerful religious figure standing before him. He finds it incredibly hard to believe that someone so remarkably young could hold the exalted title of Archbishop. A tense pause stretches between them as the Archbishop's piercing gaze locks directly onto Yu. The thick lenses of his glasses briefly flash under the office lights. Breaking the suffocating tension, Randall suddenly releases a massive, exhausted sigh. He dramatically complains about how ridiculously annoying his subordinates are whenever he tries to do something simple. Yu, Katia, and Clara stand completely paralyzed, their jaws dropping in sheer, utter disbelief. The Archbishop's abrupt shift from a dignified leader to a complaining slacker shatters their expectations entirely. Dropping all formalities, Randall furiously shakes Yu's hand while loudly apologizing for the massive inconvenience. He excitedly admits he wanted to meet Yu personally, but his strict guards simply refused to allow it. Flashing a bright, carefree grin, Randall introduces himself all over again with completely unrestrained enthusiasm. A bewildered Yu sweats profusely as the Archbishop cheerfully admits his true, laid-back nature. With his strict subordinates finally gone, Randall eagerly urges the group to drop the stiff act and just be honest. Yu awkwardly stammers out a greeting, completely thrown off by the bizarre pace of the meeting. Pointing a finger enthusiastically, The archbishop excitedly demands that they all properly introduce themselves. He sets a completely relaxed, friendly tone for the highly anticipated conversation. Katia forcefully shoves a hesitant Yu forward, bluntly telling him to stop holding back and just be himself. A terrified Clara warns that resisting the archbishop will only make him abuse his authority. Yielding to the absolute absurdity of the situation, Yu sighs heavily and offers a casual introduction. He simply states his name and confidently declares his ultimate love for cooking and eating. Randall's eyes light up with pure joy as he expresses how incredibly glad he is that this meeting finally happened. He reveals that Katia shared some fascinating details that completely captured his interest. Shifting his attention, the archbishop locks his curious gaze onto the trembling elf girl hiding in the back. He offers a warm smile and asks for the identity of the mysterious companion. Startled by the sudden attention, Clara flushes bright red and frantically stammers out her name. The young elf girl bows deeply, desperately trying to maintain some level of formal respect. Smiling warmly, Randall gracefully steers the conversation directly back to the main topic at hand. He zeroes in on Yu, firmly declaring that the young hunter is the sole reason for this entire gathering. Yu's casual expression instantly vanishes, replaced by a sharp, highly guarded stare. He braces himself as the archbishop directly brings up his mysterious, rapidly evolving power. A cunning smirk briefly plays across Randall's face as he admits his absolute fascination. The powerful religious leader clearly sees something incredibly valuable hidden within the young boy. Quickly waving his hands in a placating gesture, Randall insists that you should not misunderstand his intentions. He swears that this meeting is driven purely by his own personal curiosity. Refusing to let his guard down, Yu glares suspiciously at the man sitting before him. Sensing the distrust, Randall quickly promises he has absolutely no intention of exploiting the boy's abilities. Randall flashes a reassuring smile, visibly relieved that the tense hunter seems to understand his harmless motives. The oppressive atmosphere in the office finally begins to dissolve into genuine curiosity. Gazing out the massive window, the archbishop genuinely apologizes for forcing the meeting in his office. He admits that if he hadn't taken this drastic step, he would have completely lost his chance to see the boy. Casting a sharp glance over his shoulder, Randall seamlessly pivots the conversation toward its true purpose. He completely drops the idle chatter, ready to dive straight into the heart of the matter. Standing tall before the window, the archbishop poses a highly critical question to the confused group. He bluntly asks if any of them truly understand the fundamental concept of skills. Seeing their blank expressions, Randall gently clarifies that the term is merely used for basic convenience. He explains that the world has not yet established an official classification for these bizarre powers. He notes that the phenomenon is strikingly similar to the mysterious powers wielded by terrifying demons. The archbishop humbly admits that even the highest authorities know practically nothing about how it all works. Randall describes these skills as absolute, logic-defying powers that standard magic simply cannot replicate. He emphasizes that possessing such an overwhelming force is incredibly rare among normal humans. He explains that these incredible abilities can violently awaken within a person completely out of nowhere. Conversely, some remarkably rare individuals are simply born wielding these absolute powers. Pacing slightly, Randall reveals a crucial theory linking an individual's unique lifestyle directly to their awakened abilities. Because the manifestations vary so wildly, tracking down the exact trigger remains a total mystery. Using a swordsman's bond with their blade as an example, Randall illustrates how profound dedication unlocks hidden strength. Yu's eyes widen in sudden realization as he connects the archbishop's theory to his own bizarre evolution. Catching the flash of understanding in Yu's eyes, Randall offers a knowing, highly suggestive smirk. The archbishop confirms the boy's silent realization with a single, absolute word of agreement. Randall practically drools over the sheer practicality of Yu's ability to instantly identify perfectly edible ingredients. He excitedly points out that such a miraculous power could completely eradicate the fear of starvation. Leaning forward with intense excitement, the archbishop highlights the ultimate, world-changing value of this skill. He declares that you could easily survive and feast even in the absolute harshest, frozen environments. Clara casts a quick, nervous glance toward Katia as the archbishop continues his enthusiastic rant. The elf girl silently processes the massive implications of Yu's seemingly humble cooking skills. A sharp realization pierces Clara's mind as she analyzes the archbishop's excited ramblings. She instantly deduces that Katia intentionally hid the terrifying truth about Yu's infinite power amplification. Glancing softly at the brave knight, Yu flashes a warm, incredibly grateful smile. He silently thanks Katia for protecting his most dangerous secret from the greedy eyes of the church. Bringing the focus back, Randall reminds them that while skill owners exist, true utility is remarkably rare. He stresses that Yu's unique, survival-oriented abilities put him in a completely different league entirely. The archbishop aggressively leans in, eagerly declaring his burning desire to see exactly how far Yu's bizarre powers can evolve. Overwhelmed by the intense praise, Yu nervously agrees while Randall insists he should be immensely proud. The friendly chatter instantly evaporates as a heavy, serious tone suddenly drops over the office. The archbishop firmly plants his hands on the desk, preparing to lay out his ultimate proposal. Slamming his hand down with undeniable authority, Randall completely shatters Yu's expectations. He locks eyes with the stunned hunter and boldly assumes his ultimate destination is the treacherous polar regions. Flashing a brilliant, highly confident smile, the archbishop offers the absolute backing of his immense power. He boldly declares his full intention to sponsor Yu's incredibly dangerous journey into the frozen unknown. Stunned by the archbishop's confirmation of support, Yu questions why the church would actively back their journey. Randall explains that traveling to the polar regions requires official permission and substantial funding, promising full backing as part of the Zao religion. Adding a strict condition to his support, the archbishop insists another girl must accompany Katia and Yu on their expedition. Still deeply suspicious, Yu wonders aloud why a powerful figure would go so far for strangers, prompting Randall to cite the essence of human potential. Randall passionately describes skills as the true fruit of human effort, emphasizing that a person's lifestyle directly shapes their unique abilities. He notes that while some powers manifest from seemingly useless objects, individual skills can vary wildly and even pose a danger to others. Praising Yu's specific ability to recognize food, Randall views it as an evolutionary triumph built through humanity's long history of trial and error. Flailing his arms in excitement, the archbishop passionately declares that embracing the unknown fuels humanity's drive toward a better future. Quickly clearing his throat, Randall apologizes for getting too heated but insists that human potential cannot be taken away. Lowering his gaze, the archbishop admits his own burning desire as a man to explore the unknown reaches of the world. Smiling warmly, he hopes Yu will let him be involved in this grand adventure, aiming to use his position to help people achieve greater things. His eyes shining with shared excitement, Yu gazes back at the archbishop in absolute awe at his grand vision. Throwing his reservations aside, Yu loudly proclaims that he completely understands the archbishop's adventurous spirit. Brushing off Katia's concerns about abusing his power, Randall quickly finalizes the official paperwork for their polar exploration as an investigation request. Grasping Randall's hands with immense enthusiasm, Yu eagerly seals their newfound agreement. Walking away from the Grand Temple, Yu stares at the official papers and comments that exploring the harsh polar regions will definitely not be a simple task. Settling into their inn, Katia admits she found the archbishop surprisingly interesting and generous for covering their hotel expenses. Noticing Katia's gloomy expression, Yu asks what is bothering her, feeling guilty for dragging her into this situation. Katia dismisses his guilt but confesses she is deeply worried since she kept the most dangerous aspect of his power a secret. Looking visibly anxious, she points out that the archbishop assigning another person to travel with them is highly suspicious. Yu casually wonders if they are being spied on, though Katia doubts Archbishop Demetrius would directly interfere with their journey. She explains that Demetrius is known for unconditionally offering a helping hand to the innocent while ruthlessly punishing the wicked. Despite viewing the archbishop as a true believer in Zaoism, Katia admits she cannot shake her lingering suspicions about a possible dark side. Clara brightly interjects, confidently assuring them that they will find a way to handle whatever happens. Smiling softly at Clara's unwavering optimism, Yu agrees and decides to move forward. Gathering around their room, Yu enthusiastically kicks off their very first polar expedition conference. As Clara nervously wonders if she will be a burden, Yu suggests he should first explain the polar regions before deciding their destination. Yu describes the polar regions as a general term for various extreme environments, each housing completely unique ecosystems. He warns that lands densely populated by powerful demons are incredibly perilous, though they also provide the most delicious meat. Detailing the bizarre nature of these unexplored lands, he mentions floating sky islands and underground rivers of molten rock. Clara's eyes sparkle at the romantic notion of floating continents, imagining a beautiful fairy tale setting. Katia brings them back to reality, warning that while these fantastical continents exist, the demons inhabiting them are terrifyingly strong. When asked for a specific destination, Yu suggests they start their journey by heading straight for the White Desert. He explains that the endless sandy expanse is known for its dry air and freezing temperatures, making it highly uninhabitable for normal travelers. Yu concludes that while the desert features relatively weak demons, the harsh environment still requires careful preparation and strength. Nodding in agreement, Katia emphasizes that the bottom line is they still need careful preparation and a certain amount of strength to survive. Surging with undeniable determination, Yu clenches his fist and enthusiastically agrees with the plan. Stepping forward with newfound resolve, Clara declares her absolute readiness for the perilous journey. Beaming brightly, Clara announces she is fully on board with heading to the White Desert, admitting she needs to prepare herself since this is her first adventure. Realizing they are all united in their decision, Katia urges Yu to make the final declaration for the group. Raising his voice with sheer excitement, Yu officially declares the White Desert as their first expedition destination. Strolling through the bustling market, Katia sternly reminds the group that shopping is serious business, leaving Yu dreading any unnecessary trouble. Surveying the sprawling market stalls, Yu sensibly suggests they focus only on what is immediately available since they cannot possibly buy everything in one day. Recalling the archbishop's generous backing, Katia encourages Yu to buy whatever he needs without hesitation or frugality. Looking back with a practical smile, Yu firmly rejects her idea of reckless spending and insists they carefully narrow down their purchases. Visualizing themselves crushed under gigantic backpacks, the girls groan as Yu advises them to buy only absolute necessities to avoid burdening their small group. Staring intently at a massive pile of nuts, Yu confidently purchases a large batch while Clara silently wonders if he can actually carry such a heavy load. Hauling the heavy sack over his shoulder, Yu notices Katia looking slightly disappointed about eating nothing but plain nuts during their long journey. Flashing a confident and reassuring grin, Yu promises he has already thought of a solution, leaving Clara curious about what kind of delicious dish he plans to cook. Eager to continue their shopping spree, Yu cheerfully ushers the girls forward, assuring them that his culinary plans will easily cover their nutritional needs. Inspecting a massive mound of dried wild vegetables, Yu decides the hearty greens will be perfect for their rations while Katia notes their popularity among knights. Carrying their bulging supplies, the trio catches the attention of a nearby vendor who curiously asks if they are preparing for a major expedition. The cheerful, mustached vendor presents a leafy root as a highly recommended item, prompting Katia to instantly recognize the strange plant. Katia thoroughly explains that the root, known as a zabi, serves as a traditional good luck charm that never rots and wards off evil spirits. Inspecting the strange plant closely, Yu concludes in disappointment that it holds no culinary value, leaving Katia baffled that his first instinct was to eat a magical charm. Taking a deep whiff of the root, Yu's eyes widen with joy as he recognizes the sharp scent of wasabi, immediately declaring he will buy it. Gripping her hands together in sheer horror, Katia shrieks at the idea of him actually eating the protective charm while Yu hums a happy tune. Examining the rough texture of the dried root, Yu ponders how best to utilize its spicy properties, admitting that eating it completely raw is the wrong approach. Reminiscing about his favorite condiment, Yu expresses his desperate hope to recreate that perfect flavor while Katia takes a hesitant sniff and immediately regrets it. Leaving the utterly bewildered merchant behind, the fully loaded trio sets off down the cobblestone street to continue their massive shopping trip. The curious vendor decides to test the root himself, snapping it in half and bringing it close to his face in total confusion. The pungent, spicy fumes directly assault the poor merchant's nostrils, sending him reeling backward in sheer agony as he cries out to the heavens. Gazing out over the horizon, Clara casually points out the sheer volume of supplies they accumulated, making Katia profoundly grateful for the archbishop's financial backing. Watching Clara effortlessly haul a heavy wooden crate, Yu admits the local goods were surprisingly expensive but knows they have no other choice. Katia solemnly agrees that compromising on the quality of their gear would be a fatal mistake, though her sharp gaze suddenly shifts to Yu. Studying a meticulously crafted sword and set of armor, Yu notes the distinct lack of mass-produced goods in this era, realizing everything is forged by hand. Staring into the distance, a fleeting wave of melancholy washes over Yu as the stark reality of living in a magical, adventure-driven world alien to Earth sinks in. Snapped out of his deep thoughts by Clara's concerned voice, Yu turns his attention to a nearby merchant's table displaying simple metallic tools. Clara tilts her head in utter confusion, wondering why a plain steel rod and a simple board have completely captivated his attention. Bursting with sudden excitement, Yu eagerly asks the smoking merchant if the tool is actually a fire starter, and the vendor welcomes him to see a demonstration. Marveling at finding such a practical tool in a fantasy setting, you thrills the vendor, who slams his hand down in pure shock at finally meeting a customer who understands his invention. Turning to the baffled girls, you eagerly explains that this incredible device is a massive upgrade over traditional flint and steel, leaving them completely fascinated. Eager to test the intriguing fire starter, you politely asks the cheerful shopkeeper for permission to try it out. Gripping the steel rod firmly, you strikes it against the metallic board with a swift and decisive flick. To everyone's absolute shock, a massive fiery spark erupts from the tool with a deafening swoosh. As Katia marvels at the intense heat of the sparks, you casually explains that the tool is crafted from phodium, a rare metal found in the Arctic Circle. Brushing off their confusion, you excitedly realizes the mysterious metal functions exactly like magnesium, a chemical concept completely foreign to Katia. Staring at the sleek metal rod, you is utterly fascinated that such a highly practical item actually exists in this fantasy realm. He notes that while it shares the same basic principle as a traditional flint, this specialized tool makes starting a fire incredibly effortless. Crouching down with a bright smile, he happily declares that even a complete beginner like Clara could easily light a fire in harsh rain or snow. Stunned by its user-friendly design, Katia demands to know where he got it while you continues to praise the amazing tool. Scratching his head sheepishly, the shopkeeper confesses he was a former adventurer who struggled with fires, prompting him to remember this unique polar metal. Recalling how his peers aggressively mocked him for using the unwieldy raw metal, the man explains he simply took some to a fabricator to be properly machined. You excitedly realizes the tool is functionally identical to modern survival gear, marveling that such an advanced concept exists in a predominantly medieval society. Staring at the humble merchant, Yu's eyes shine with profound awe and genuine admiration for his ingenuity. Grasping the shopkeeper's hand in a firm handshake, Yu enthusiastically declares he will buy the fire starter without hesitation. Leaning in close, Yu expresses his deepest respect for the man, praising him for single-handedly inventing such wonderful survival tools. Reflecting on the encounter, Yu warmly acknowledges that while some cling to tradition, true pioneers forge new paths and create incredible things through sheer imagination. Brimming with newfound determination, Yu clenches his fist and declares he is feeling incredibly motivated for their upcoming journey. Calling out to his companions, Yu excitedly leads the girls back to the inn for a well-deserved dinner. A polite voice cordially invites the group inside as they finally approach the designated room. Stepping forward with hesitant thanks, Yu instantly freezes in utter confusion as he walks through the door. Greeted by a massive chorus of overlapping voices, Yu awkwardly scratches his head while navigating the overwhelming welcome. Katia notes his unusual nervousness, prompting Yu to admit that receiving such grand treatment from a massive organization makes him highly uncomfortable. Smiling brightly, Katia reassures him there is absolutely no need to be afraid anymore. She officially declares that they are now recognized as personal friends and guests of Archbishop Demetrius. Approaching a grand set of doors, Katia announces her arrival with their special guests. A familiar voice from inside readily permits them to come on through. Demetrius enthusiastically welcomes them inside, announcing his burning desire for them to meet a brand new friend today. A remarkably small, quiet girl with braided hair and a delicate dress stands before them, staring blankly ahead. Apologizing for startling them, a smiling Demetrius confesses he simply could not contain his massive secret any longer. Prompted by the Archbishop to say hello, a weary Alicia politely introduces herself before letting out a massive, exhausted yawn. Demetrius formally presents the young girl to you, revealing she is the specific person he wants them to take on their polar expedition. Pure panic washes over Katia as she stares at the sleepy child, completely unsure how they could possibly bring a girl this incredibly small into danger. Sensing their immediate skepticism, Katia questions what Demetrius is thinking, but the Archbishop calmly promises to fully explain his reasoning. Demetrius admits entrusting Alicia to them was a deeply difficult choice. However, after hearing their earnest resolve, he knew there was no better time to hand her over. The Archbishop reiterates that human potential is strictly divided into innate abilities and those actively acquired by the way a person chooses to live. Yu nods along carefully, humming in slow understanding as he waits for the Archbishop's ultimate point. Demetrius reveals that Alicia is an acquired skill holder who possesses the powerful ability of slumber. He explains that her skill uniquely forces subjects into deep drowsiness and instantly calms their excitement. Stunned by this major revelation, Yu realizes the sleepy little girl vigorously rubbing her eyes is a skill holder exactly like his companions. Maintaining his sharp gaze, Demetrius steers the heavy conversation back to the complex nature of her acquired abilities. Correcting their quick assumption that it was a standard acquired skill, Demetrius grimly notes that Alicia's situation is technically quite different. With a remarkably somber expression, the archbishop states the horrifying truth that Alicia was forcefully made to learn her unique skill. Absolute shock paralyzes you, Katia, and Clara as the sickening weight of the archbishop's words finally sets in. Utterly appalled by the dark revelation, Katia desperately questions if someone actually forced a tiny child to artificially learn a combat skill. Connecting the twisted dots, you remembers that if acquired skills are developed solely by the way one lives, someone completely manipulated her entire life. Watching the innocent child yawn peacefully, they sickeningly wonder how her captors ever managed to specifically cultivate the slumber skill within her. Demetrius confesses that rogue Zaoist members forcefully kept her in an artificial sleep since she was 5 years old for 10 agonizing years. She only awoke for the bare minimum required to keep her physically normal. Furious at the profound betrayal by her own trusted organization, Katia screams that she was never told absolutely anything about this horrific abuse. Trembling with pure outrage and disgust, Katia realizes with a sickening shiver that the church treated an innocent little girl exactly like a disposable lab rat. Demetrius remains deadly calm, explaining it is no wonder Katia knew nothing because the sinister skill acquisition experiments were conducted in absolute secrecy. He grimly concludes that unless someone was directly involved in the Twisted Project, only a tiny handful of people within the Order even knew the atrocity existed. Expressing her simple love for sleep, Alicia softly waves off their deep concerns with a drowsy dismissal. Gritting his teeth, Demetrius grimly reveals that despite other gifted subjects, Alicia was the sole survivor of the horrific experiment. Narrowing her eyes in suspicion, Katia silently questions why the archbishop would suddenly reveal such a deeply guarded secret to them. Acknowledging the extreme risk, Demetrius admits he must pull dangerous strings to smuggle Alicia out since his own freedom is strictly limited. Piercing the trio with a serious glare, the archbishop offers the adventurers one final chance to back out of this perilous arrangement. Explaining the church's strict laws, Demetrius reveals he is granting her special dispensation because Zaoist knights are forbidden from entering the Arctic Circle. Throwing his arms back in dramatic frustration, Demetrius complains bitterly about the heavy restrictions preventing the church from acting directly. Flashing a stressed but charismatic smile, the archbishop shamelessly admits to the group that he is in incredibly deep trouble. The trio stands completely frozen in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the archbishop's dangerous political maneuvering. Assuring them of her value, Demetrius reveals that despite her fragile appearance, Alicia possesses incredible magic that rivals seasoned polar adventurers. Expanding on the vast geography of their destination, the archbishop drops a massive piece of lore regarding the untamed polar regions. Gazing softly at the quiet girl, Demetrius expresses his heartfelt desire for her to finally experience genuine freedom in the wider world. Crying out in sudden pain, Yu winces as he is sharply reprimanded for calling the little girl tough. Flinching from the sharp physical correction, the young man groans in pain while standing awkwardly before the unimpressed girls. Recovering from the quick assault, Yu asks Demetrius why he is risking everything when knowing about the secret experiment puts him in extreme danger. Demetrius states with unwavering conviction that keeping a living human confined in a shell is fundamentally wrong. Revealing his hidden agenda, the archbishop admits he has been desperately waiting for the right moment to save her by trusting the famed dragon slayers. Gently patting Alicia's head, Demetrius explains that traveling alongside another skill holder will be an invaluable experience for her growth. Exchanging determined glances, Yu and his companions firmly nod their heads in absolute agreement. A large, welcoming hand extends gently toward the sleepy young girl. Hesitation flickers in her wide eyes as she focuses intently on the outstretched hand before her. Flashing a bright and reassuring smile, Yu formally introduces himself as the leader of their upcoming polar expedition. Following his confident lead, Katia and Clara excitedly jump in to introduce themselves to their new friend. The young girl's eyes widen slightly as the overwhelming warmth of her new companions washes over her. A faint glimmer of emotion stirs within her usually vacant gaze as she slowly processes their unconditional acceptance. Towering over her with gentle smiles, the trio radiates a comforting and fiercely protective aura. The heavy tension completely vanishes from the room as the newly formed party officially welcomes their youngest member. Shutting her eyes peacefully, the small girl finally lets her guard down in the presence of true allies. Reaching out with her tiny hand, she firmly grasps Yu's larger one and politely places herself in their care. Beaming with infectious joy, Yu and Katia smile down at the newest member of their expedition team as their grand adventure finally begins. Heaving a massive sigh of relief, Yu cheerfully declares their business concluded while admitting he had absolutely no backup plan if the archbishop refused. His expression shifting to deadly seriousness, the young leader coldly points out his initial reluctance to trust an organization that artificially manufactures skill holders. Meeting his intense gaze, Demetrius silently processes the heavy accusation before a slow, knowing smile touches his lips. Weighing the archbishop's genuine sincerity, Yu flashes a confident grin and finally decides to place his complete trust in Demetrius Randall. Taking his agreement as a solid confirmation, Yu officially sets their departure for the White Desert in exactly 3 days. Standing protectively behind Alicia, Demetrius promises to fully supply her while swearing to never interfere with the team's autonomous decisions. Flashing a brilliantly charismatic smile, the archbishop completely entrusts the monumental task to the young adventurers. Fired up for the journey, Yu loudly confirms their strict 3-day deadline while Demetrius affectionately pats the small girl's head. Swiftly delivering a brutal punch to Yu's stomach, Katia sharply orders him to stop acting like a total fool. Wincing from the sudden strike, Yu cheerfully bids Alicia farewell as the little girl softly acknowledges her new captain. Catching a subtle change in the young girl's demeanor, Demetrius widens his eyes in absolute astonishment. Gazing down at the usually emotionless child, he warmly points out the faint, precious smile gracing her face. Raising a tiny hand in farewell, Alicia sleepily excuses her rare display of emotion by reminding him she is usually unconscious. Sealing their dangerous pact, a firm, unwavering handshake completely solidifies the alliance between the adventurers and the archbishop. Staring intently at Yu's back, Katia smiles with silent, unwavering faith in her newly chosen leader. 3 days flash by in an instant as a loud greeting breaks the morning silence outside a battered workshop. Peeking nervously through the creaking door, Yu desperately hopes he did not miss the crucial appointment to pick up his custom weapon. A rugged, exhausted blacksmith stumbles into view, groggily recognizing the crazy kid who commissioned the impossible weapon. Eyes sparkling with pure, unadulterated awe, Yu practically vibrates with excitement as he violently grasps the flawlessly crafted dragonclaw bow. Staring at the terrifying weapon with heavy bags under his eyes, the drained blacksmith prays the boy actually knows how to wield it. Utterly depleted of all his life force, the haggard craftsman groans in agony and instantly collapses into his bedroom for a well-deserved rest. The morning sun brightly illuminates the quiet sky as the young adventurer marvels at his newly acquired firepower. Inspecting the lethal, jagged edges of the bow, Yu enthusiastically praises the breathtaking precision and masterful craftsmanship applied to the dragon's claw. Gripping his ultimate weapon with explosive confidence, Yu boldly declares that they are finally ready to begin their grand polar adventure. Spotting a thick, mysterious tome in her companion's hands, Clara curiously asks what she is reading, prompting Katia to reveal it is a magical grimoire. Acknowledging their highly dangerous destination, Katia earnestly details her practical strategy to master both offensive and healing magic for the journey ahead. A tense, quiet anticipation fills the room as the sheer weight of their upcoming polar expedition hangs heavily in the air. Looking downcast, Clara quietly admits her inability to read the complex text, but Katia warmly promises they will study it together. Raising her hand with a confident spark, Katia dramatically points a finger forward to demonstrate the true power hidden within the ancient pages. In a blinding flash of raw energy, a searing beam of light erupts violently from Katia's fingertip and tears through the air. Wide-eyed and utterly blown away, Yu wildly praises Katia for conjuring such a precise and explosive magical attack. Modestly brushing off the high praise, Katia humbly admits her magical skills are still nowhere near their full, terrifying potential. Attempting to mimic her refined technique, Yu accidentally unleashes a terrifying, uncontrolled barrage of massive spikes that completely shatters the room's wooden structure. Horrified by Yu's monstrous and destructive power, Clara urgently begs Katia to teach her proper, safe magic instead. Snapping back to the harsh reality of their physical preparations, Yu firmly yanks a thick rope to secure their heavy travel gear. Flashing a confident grin, Yu triumphantly announces that all their critical expedition supplies are finally secured and ready to go. Meanwhile, A tranquil silence falls over the sleeping form of Alicia as she rests peacefully beneath a beautifully embroidered floral blanket. Letting out a soft, adorable mumble in her deep slumber, the tiny girl continues to sleep completely undisturbed by the surrounding commotion. Gazing at her fragile frame, you vividly visualize as a massive ship navigating brutal oceans and worries about dragging such a delicate child into danger. Kadia's expression darkens as she grimly recalls the horrific truth of Alicia's artificially induced 10-year slumber. Sitting beside the bed, Kadia softly admits she sometimes wishes she could just sleep her troubles away, prompting a sympathetic nod from you. Without any warning, the tiny girl bolts upright, radiating an intense, overwhelming aura that instantly paralyzes you, Kadia, and Clara in pure shock. Maintaining a chillingly calm demeanor, Alicia politely thanks them for calling her cute while terrifyingly stating that she still has plenty of room to grow. Trembling under the intense pressure, Kadia sweats profusely as she is utterly dominated by the sleepy child's surprisingly aggressive inferiority complex. Sweating nervously, Kadia stares at the tiny girl and asks if she is finally awake. Alicia casually confirms she was indeed asleep, noting that resting is simply part of her core ability. Fixing them with a calm stare, she reveals her unique power is called sleep supremacy. She explains that her ability allows her to perfectly monitor her surroundings even while deeply unconscious. Demonstrating her complete control, Alicia announces she is ready to drop into a deep slumber whenever she desires. You and Kadia realize in absolute awe that the young girl can flawlessly guard their camp during the night shift while resting. Stunned by the incredible utility of the skill, Kadia admits it is awesome but still harbors lingering doubts. Kadia questions how Alicia can blindly trust complete strangers with her life when sleep leaves a person so highly vulnerable. Meeting Kadia's intense gaze without flinching, Alicia firmly states she holds absolutely no doubts about her new companions. The small girl adds that she never gets tired, but casually offers to rotate shifts if the others ever struggle. Smiling with complete faith, you happily leaves the night watch to her capable hands as they prepare for the polar region's dangers. He cheerfully admits that knowing they are completely safe at night takes a massive burden off their shoulders. Kadia awkwardly asks if you ever gets anxious relying on such an unpredictable person, but he confidently brushes off the concern. Overhearing their quiet exchange, Alicia officially volunteers to handle the entire night watch to help ease Kadia's lingering anxiety. Smiling brightly at the arrangement, Yu heads back to bed and cheerfully tells the young girl to wake him if anything goes wrong. Finally letting her guard down, Kadia looks softly at the small girl and bids her a good night. A faint, genuinely warm smile subtly graces Alicia's usually expressionless face. Shifting comfortably, the tiny skill holder snuggles deep into her heavily embroidered blankets. Wishing everyone a good night, Alicia peacefully drifts off to sleep, silently cherishing the warm feeling of being truly trusted. Arriving at their freezing destination, a massive wooden ship drops its heavy anchor amidst the bustling, snow-covered coastal port. Stepping off the wooden ramp into the freezing air, Kadia exhales a thick cloud of white breath while adjusting to the harsh new climate. Bundled tightly in his heavy winter gear, Yu smiles brightly and officially welcomes the group to the infamous White Desert. Towering ominously before them, a massive, jagged mountain of ice radiates an intense and otherworldly magical glow. Gazing up at the breathtaking scenery, Alicia admits in pure awe that she never knew such a magical place actually existed. Kadia explains the beautiful phenomenon is called ice magic, where highly concentrated mana crystallizes at high altitudes and rains down like light. Catching the shimmering dust in his hands, Yu realizes this falling magic is exactly what paints the barren landscape a brilliant, glowing white. Maintaining a highly cautious gaze, Kadia reminds her team that this beautiful world is also terrifyingly unpredictable and dangerous. Yu cheerfully praises their incredibly thin but warm winter clothes, prompting Kadia to proudly reveal she expensed the highest grade temperature control gear available. She strictly warns him that the magical heating function drains physical stamina, meaning he must remain highly vigilant against sudden exhaustion. Observing the crowded port, Kadia expresses genuine surprise at the sheer number of adventurers disembarking in this relatively easy polar zone. Spotting something useful in the distance, Clara quickly directs the group's attention toward the snowy shoreline. She points to a sturdy coastal cabin near Moira's, suggesting it as the perfect secure location to store their heavy excess supplies. Kadia grimly notes that while many test their mettle here and retreat on the next ship, an alarming number of adventurers simply never return. Shivering slightly at the morbid reality, you listens closely as Katia explains that the white desert remains largely uninvestigated. Showcasing a floating, dark crystal, Katia reveals it is highly valuable-ish or forged by magical ice. Connecting the dots, you realizes they can easily farm this lucrative weapon crafting material right on the safe coastline without braving the dangerous backwoods. His eyes sparkling with pure adventurous thrill, you confidently declares that their grand journey is already getting incredibly exciting. Clasping her hands tightly together, Katia solemnly whispers the word uncharted as a deep, personal longing washes over her. She vulnerably admits her desperate hope to find any lingering traces of her lost people hidden within this vast, uninhabitable polar region. Snapping out of her melancholic daze, Katia loudly cheers and officially kicks off their very first true expedition. Taking immediate tactical command, you points to a nearby hill and orders the team to climb it so they can properly scout the surrounding terrain. Spotting a patch of resilient desert plants, you excitedly points out the crucial evidence of an ancient dried-up riverbed. Katia nods in firm agreement, logically deducing that any surviving human settlements would naturally cluster around a vital water source. Evaluating the gentle rocky slope ahead, Katia assures the team their current strength is sufficient but demands extreme caution during the ascent. The rest of the group stares in mild confusion as Katia cryptically blames the treacherous climbing conditions entirely on the local climate. Bracing themselves against the biting wind, you and Katia take their first heavy steps onto the rising snowy incline. Katia warns that the severely dry air cracks the earth, turning the fine surface sand into a lethal slide that offers absolutely zero traction. Flashing a fearless, high-octane grin, you boldly takes the absolute front and commands his team to start moving forward. Digging their hands into the unstable icy terrain, the young adventurers begin crawling up the treacherous slope as their true polar survival test officially begins. Reaching the top of the steep incline, you firmly grips Katia's hand and successfully pulls her up to the snowy ledge. The entire party finally crests the ridge, gazing out over the vast and blindingly bright polar landscape. Staring at the massive, sweeping canyon before them, Katia breathes out in pure awe at the incredible view. Feeling the frigid breeze against his face, a thrilled you marvels at the absolute reality of finally reaching the Arctic. Katia softly voices her agreement, completely captivated by the majestic scenery surrounding them. Pointing to a massive, sweeping trench in the earth, Katia notes it looks exactly like an ancient, dried-up riverbed. She stares at the massive trail in pure wonder, deeply amazed by how drastically time alters the natural landscape. Noticing Clara looking sluggish, you turns back and asks what is wrong as she quietly admits to feeling thirsty. Wiping sweat from his brow, you realizes the intensely dry air is secretly dehydrating them despite the freezing temperatures. He warns the group that dehydration sneaks up quickly, prompting Katia to suddenly realize she is also parched. Without hesitating, Clara eagerly guzzles water from her heavy leather pouch to quench her burning thirst. Squatting comfortably on the rock, you advises her not to drink too much while suggesting they actively search for a water source to refill their supplies. Catching the glowing magical dust in her hand, Katia complains that hydrating would be much easier if this were actual snow. Flashing a bright grin, you casually brushes off her concern by noting there is not much difference in survival terms anyway. He explains the well-known survival rule that eating raw snow wildly drains body heat, so they would have to extract the water by melting it anyway. Acknowledging the harsh truth, Katia decides it is time to head back down, reminding everyone that descending the rock wall is far more dangerous. A mischievous smile creeps across Yu's face as he starts recounting a terrifying story about a climber who got permanently stuck on a cliff. Completely missing his core lesson about staying careful, a terrified Katia screams at him to stop telling scary stories while they navigate the treacherous descent. Suddenly noticing their missing party member, Yu stops completely and asks where Alicia went. Standing dangerously close to the cliff's edge, a mesmerized Alicia stares out into the howling wind. She gazes silently over the massive, sprawling white canyon as the sheer scale of the environment washes over her. Her eyes widen in absolute wonder as she whispers about the breathtaking enormity of the outside world. Dark memories flood her mind, reminding her that she spent her entire life confined within a sterile basement of stone and iron. A warm voice echoes from her past, asking if she truly wants to see the vast world outside her cage. The comforting memory promises that her new life and freedom will finally spread outward from this exact point. Yu frantically calls her back to safety, completely unaware that Alicia is quietly marveling at her unusually happy mood. Turning back with a gentle, compliant smile, she agrees to head down just as a sickening crack echoes from the rock beneath her. The unstable stone ledge violently shatters under her weight, instantly plunging the tiny girl into the deadly abyss. Time completely freezes as Alicia falls backward, her expression locked in quiet, helpless shock. Cursing loudly in pure desperation, Yu explodes into motion and dives toward the crumbling edge to save his youngest companion. Grunting with immense, explosive effort, Yu desperately stretches over the crumbling edge to catch the falling girl. Screaming for her to hang on tight, Yu grips her tiny hand with all his might as they dangle perilously over the deadly drop. With a final, desperate heave, he violently yanks them both back onto solid ground. Both of them instantly collapse into the snow, gasping wildly for much-needed air. Glaring sharply at the tiny girl, Yu sternly asks if she knows exactly what he is about to say. Trembling slightly, a deeply reprimanded Alicia meekly addresses her furious leader. Alicia quickly spits out a frantic apology for her extreme recklessness. Sighing heavily, Yu's anger vanishes as he simply orders her to be much more careful next time. Katia and Clara rush over in pure panic, frantically asking if the two of them are okay. Still sprawled in the snow, Yu reassures them, though Katia sharply points out that their physical safety is not the main issue. Staring with wide, bewildered eyes, Alicia quietly asks if they are actually worried about her. Katia immediately fires back that of course they are, insisting they need to heal any injuries right this instant. Blinking in absolute surprise, the tiny girl raises her hand to inspect a small, fresh scratch on the back of her skin. Cutting off Alicia's attempt to dismiss the wound, a fiercely smiling Clara steps forward with magical energy. She proudly declares that healing is her specialty and demands to be told whenever someone gets hurt. Realizing arguing is completely futile against their overwhelming warmth, Alicia swallows her lingering protests with a soft smile. She fully abandons her stubbornness and simply thanks them for their deep concern. Turning her absolute attention back to the boy who just risked his life for hers, Alicia solemnly calls out his name. Looking directly into his eyes, the young skill holder delivers a deeply sincere and heartfelt thank you to her heroic captain. Flashing a brilliant, relieved smile, Yu joyfully declares that he is just incredibly glad she is completely safe. The heavy tension finally evaporates as a warm, comforting atmosphere fully embraces the party. Bouncing right back to his feet, Yu enthusiastically orders the team to collect themselves so they can finally secure a proper water source. Fired up and reunited, the party eagerly shouts their agreement as they prepare for the dangerous descent. Eager to investigate their surroundings, Yu cheerfully suggests heading down to properly check out the dry riverbed. Katia questions the importance of the water's flow, prompting Yu to confirm that nothing looks visually odd and his sensory abilities detect absolutely no danger. He explains that stagnant water breeds deadly bacteria and parasites from rotting creatures, making a constantly flowing source perfectly safe to consume. Scooping up a generous handful, Yu greedily gulps down the freezing, fresh water and loudly expresses his absolute satisfaction. Alicia asks if they will camp by the water, but Yu advises setting up their tent further uphill to avoid any potential hazards. Pointing to the narrow canyon, Yu warns that an upstream blockage of trees or rocks could unexpectedly burst and trigger a massive, deadly flash flood. Katia admits she learned a lot from his survival knowledge as Yu reiterates the absolute necessity of staying vigilant against sudden natural disasters. Taking charge of their immediate survival needs, Yu announces he will hunt for food while leaving the campsite set up strictly to the girls. Alicia firmly insists on accompanying him, promising to be careful as they set off into the wild. The harsh, snow-covered landscape stretches out endlessly as the two adventurers navigate the treacherous polar terrain. Trekking cautiously along a high ridge, Yu suddenly stops and whispers that he spots something moving below. Alicia joins him at the cliff's edge, peering intently down at the frozen basin. Spotting a pair of plump, white monsters, Yu suggests a surprise attack while Alicia debates whether using his attraction skill is the smartest tactical move. Yu mentally eliminates his magical options, realizing Trap Bud lacks fresh leaves, Dragon's Breath destroys the edible bones, and Charge takes entirely too long. Whispering quietly, Yu orders Alicia to stay perfectly hidden and accepts that he must hunt the creatures using pure physical effort. Leaping fearlessly from the rocky ledge, Yu descends rapidly towards the unsuspecting prey. Startled by the sudden ambush, the round beasts instantly scatter, leaving Yu visibly frustrated that they bolted so quickly. Refusing to let his dinner escape, Yu unleashes his attraction skill to forcefully draw the monsters back. Instead of simply being pulled back, One of the beasts aggressively spins around and rockets directly toward him like a furry cannonball. Yu freezes in sudden shock while Alicia watches in pure horror from the cliff as the monster aggressively targets her captain. Transforming into blurring projectiles, the creatures launch themselves through the freezing air with terrifying velocity. Reacting on pure instinct, Yu snaps his head back to narrowly dodge the lethal high-speed strike. The relentless beasts violently ricochet off the icy terrain, executing a blindingly fast, coordinated assault. A deafening clash echoes across the canyon as the monsters strike with devastating force. Narrowing his eyes with intense combat focus, Yu immediately activates his hardening skill to withstand the brutal onslaught. He grunts in heavy pain as one of the rapid strikes slams brutally into his defensive guard. Cursing the deeply annoying situation, Yu admits his absolute inability to track their blurring movements with his normal vision. Gripping his jagged dagger tightly, he quickly formulates a reckless but necessary counter-strategy. Assuming a rigid defensive stance, Yu calculates that his lack of speed is completely irrelevant as long as the monsters actively target him. Anticipating the precise moment of impact, he shouts in pure defiance and readies his blade to violently intercept the incoming blur. Thrusting his jagged dagger forward with explosive force, Yu prepares to violently intercept the incoming beast. The massive white creature violently clamps its jaws down onto the blade, prompting Yu to lock eyes with the beast and confidently declare his readiness. Shocked by the creature's sudden physical resistance, Yu realizes the terrified beast is desperately trying to pull away and escape. Gritting his teeth in pure frustration, Yu violently curses as his agile prey slips right through his fingers. The round, furry monster wobbles frantically across the frozen canyon floor in a desperate bid for survival. Without warning, the fleeing creature emits a quiet hiss and instantly collapses motionless into the freezing snow. Fearing a lethal poison gas trap, Yu instantly throws his arm over his face before slowly realizing there is no actual danger. Standing majestically atop the high ridge, Alicia radiates a massive, shimmering aura of magical energy. Staring down with an intense gaze, the tiny skill holder warns you that her sleep effect is temporary and urges him to finish the hunt quickly. Releasing a heavy sigh of relief, Yu steps toward the heavily sedated creature and loudly shouts his sincere thanks to his newest companion. Looking perfectly composed, Alicia proudly confirms her slumber skills secured their dinner while Yu nods in absolute awe of her precision. She confidently explains her ability to force targets into deep sleep, noting it only fails if the enemy retains a high level of physical strength. Revealing her sharp tactical awareness, Alicia credits Yu for physically exhausting the beast beforehand so her magical intervention could flawlessly take effect. Peeking curiously at her captain, Alicia bluntly asks if he intentionally brought her along just to observe her combat capabilities in action. Staring intently into his eyes, she points out the beast's highly unnatural aggression and demands to know exactly what magic he used to provoke it. Scratching his head, Yu casually apologizes for keeping his attraction skill a secret, prompting Alicia to express genuine amazement at his unique power. The tiny girl harshly criticizes herself for sleeping instead of researching his abilities, but a smiling Yu warmly reassures her that learning on the job is perfectly fine. A puzzled expression crosses Yu's face as he suddenly remembers their freshly caught dinner waiting in the snow. Holding the heavily bleeding beasts by their tails, Yu happily ignores Alicia's disturbed expression and declares that properly draining the blood is absolutely essential. Flashing a triumphant, high-octane grin, Yu cheerfully invites his tiny companion to head back to camp and finally enjoy a well-deserved feast. In a blindingly fast blur of culinary expertise, Yu completely dismantles the monster carcasses and perfectly prepares the raw meat. Gathering closely around the warm campfire, Katia admits she was initially horrified by his bloody butchering but completely changes her tune upon seeing the appetizing product. Smiling confidently over the flames, Yu excitedly reveals he is cooking a hearty, meat-based version of the delicious fish ball soup they previously enjoyed. Clara cheers with explosive enthusiasm as Yu grabs his heavy blade, demonstrating how he violently beats the meat into a fine, flavorful paste. Holding up a jagged bone, Yu reveals his genius culinary deduction that the bouncing monsters possess soft, edible skeletons perfectly suited for their stew. He scientifically breaks down his theory, explaining that only flexible cartilage could survive such high-speed, violent impacts against the canyon walls without shattering. Sweating nervously at the extreme concept of eating bones, Katia listens closely as Yu passionately guarantees the minced cartilage will provide a deeply rich aftertaste. Katia bluntly labels his entire cooking style as highly abnormal, prompting you to laugh off the criticism with absolute, unshakable confidence. Violently chopping rich spices and fresh garlic into the pulverized meat, you successfully obliterates the wild game smell and releases a mouth-watering aroma. Presenting the finely minced meat, you proudly introduces the traditional Ainu dish known as ohau, preparing to simmer it with hearty vegetables for the ultimate survival meal. Brimming with uncontained excitement, you eagerly prepares to recreate a survival dish he once saw in a manga. Arranging the freshly minced meatballs on a wooden board, he cheerfully announces that it is finally time to begin the stew. Anticipation spikes among the girls as you pulls out his mysterious new tool, completely ready to spark their campfire. With a confident smirk, he violently strikes the ferrocerium rod with his heavy blade. A brilliant flash of sparks erupts instantly, igniting the tinder and roaring into a bright, warm campfire. The girls stare in pure disbelief at the instant flames, absolutely amazed that you knew exactly how to wield the rare fire starter. Clara and Katia shower him with enthusiastic praise, deeply impressed by his seemingly endless reservoir of practical survival knowledge. Modestly brushing off their glowing compliments, Yu humbles himself by claiming his expertise is actually quite limited. His heart suddenly pounds in his chest as he gets unusually flustered, awkwardly trying to steer the heavy conversation back to the cooking. Regaining his composure, he tosses a hefty handful of dried wild vegetables into the boiling pot to finish the savory masterpiece. Snow falls gently around their sturdy tent as the weary adventurers gather closely around the crackling, comforting fire. Carrying the steaming pot with a triumphant grin, Yu loudly declares that their highly anticipated dinner is finally served. He proudly presents the hot, bubbling broth as an instant ohau loaded with traditional chitatapu meatballs. The group waits eagerly inside the tent, though Alicia stares at her bowl and nervously questions if they are actually eating the bones. She grumbles that the cartilage was completely unnecessary given the abundance of meat, prompting you to awkwardly admit he just wanted it to look like the manga. Realizing his geeky culinary reasoning fell flat, Yu sheepishly apologizes while the tiny girl responds with a distinctly unimpressed huff. Mustering her courage, Alicia raises the warm meatball to her lips and takes a tentative, hesitant bite. A loud crunch echoes as she chews, her cheeks twitching wildly from the surprisingly dense and chewy cartilage texture. Yu beams brightly as she blushes deep red, completely overwhelmed by the exciting, ever-changing texture of the delicious meal. Clara and Katia joyfully dissect the flavor profile, praising the sweet meat fat and the refreshing, slightly bitter aftertaste of the wild vegetables. Closing his eyes in absolute bliss, Yu smiles warmly as the rich, savory broth thaws his freezing body from the inside out. The peaceful snowy silence is shattered by a chorus of eager voices demanding immediate seconds of the incredible stew. Staring deeply into her warm bowl, Alicia admits in pure astonishment that Yu's cooking provides a profound, undeniable comfort. She reflects solemnly on her bleak past, revealing she once viewed cold soup and stale bread as perfectly sufficient nourishment. Gazing up from her steaming meal, she softly confesses that this incredible feast has finally opened her eyes to the true joy of eating. Leaning in with a gentle, reassuring smile, Yu promises her that there is an entire world of wonderful things left to discover. Locking eyes with the quiet girl, he confidently asks if she thinks this grand adventure is going to be fun. A soft, beautifully genuine expression touches her face as Alicia looks at her captain and respectfully agrees. The touching moment shatters instantly when Yu loudly craves another dragon steak, causing the girls to scream at him for ruining the mood and making them hungry all over again. Breathing a sigh of relief, Katia happily admits the snowy trek is surprisingly much less exhausting than she initially feared. Struggling up the steep icy incline, a fiercely frustrated Alicia bitterly curses her tiny stature for making every single step a massive pain. Clara cheerfully encourages the tiny girl by praising her boundless potential, prompting a slightly envious Katia to declare they must simply try their best. Reaching down with a warm smile, Katia graciously offers a helping hand to easily pull the struggling Alicia up the snowy slope. Alicia coldly rejects the assistance to preserve her youthful pride, casually roasting the 19-year-old Katia's frantic impatience in the brutal process. As the group continues their grueling polar trek, Clara curiously asks Yu about the mysterious food he prepared before their departure. Flashing a highly confident grin, Yu boldly declares it is finally time for the grand reveal and eagerly reaches into his heavy pack. He triumphantly pulls out a solid block of chocolate, instantly sparking pure, unadulterated awe and excitement in the girl's wide eyes. Yu proudly explains that this decadent treat is not just plain chocolate, but a rich survival blend packed with crushed nuts, sugar, and sweet syrup. Recalling his recent shopping trip in Moira's, he notes that he specifically sought out the rare chocolate alongside other vital market supplies. He explains that while the rich ingredient is typically consumed as a trendy beverage in this world, the solid bar form makes for an incredibly popular city snack. Staring at the sweet treat with sparkling eyes, Clara eagerly begs for a bite before Yu swiftly interrupts her growing excitement. Sweating nervously under their intense gazes, he reminds them it is technically a survival ration but ultimately caves to their undeniable cravings. Taking strict charge of the situation, Yu lays down the absolute rules by explaining the bar is a high-calorie ration perfectly designed for quick digestion. He holds up 2 fingers and firmly decrees that everyone only gets exactly 3 precious pieces for the entire duration of their expedition. Earning a collective gasp, he strictly limits them to 1 piece a day to prevent them from growing complacent and gaining unnecessary weight. Clara immediately uses her innocent charm to beg for her first piece right this instant, prompting a defeated sigh from her captain as he finally hands it over. The weary adventurers happily circle up in the snow and joyfully cheer as they finally dig into the precious chocolate rations. Biting into the rich squares, Clara and Katia squeal in absolute delight over the surprisingly chunky, overwhelmingly sweet flavor profile. Yu happily watches them enjoy the treat, noting its intense sweetness is perfectly engineered for delivering massive energy while constantly on the move. A sudden wave of absolute dread washes over Katia as she realizes the terrifying effectiveness of the sugary fat could easily ruin her pristine figure. Smiling at her visible panic, Yu gently reassures Katia that their constant, grueling movement will effortlessly burn off all the extra calories. Standing tall with his heavy pack, he reiterates that the compact superfood is a vital emergency booster specifically designed to save them when they feel completely overwhelmed. Deeply impressed by the tactical utility of the portable energy meal, Katia seriously vows to share the brilliant concept with her fellow knights back home. Staring up at him with profound respect, Katia warmly praises his endlessly unique and amazing survival ingenuity. Blushing heavily from the high praise, Yu humbly brushes it off while Katia marvels that traveling with him feels like experiencing the distant future. Eager to keep moving forward, Yu playfully teases Katia about gaining weight and officially orders the team to resume their polar trek. Suddenly sensing a highly ominous presence, Yu stops completely in his tracks and locks an intense gaze onto the snowy horizon. A massive, terrifying disturbance violently disrupts the quiet landscape as the distant snowy earth begins to unnaturally heave upward. A deafening rumble violently shatters the freezing air as a colossal, unseen force erupts aggressively from beneath the frozen terrain. Stopping dead in his tracks, Yu locks his eyes on the shifting landscape and asks if the ground itself is actually moving. A massive trail of displaced snow violently accelerates toward the group, prompting Yu to shout a frantic warning. Staring in pure disbelief, Clara watches helplessly as the frozen earth aggressively ruptures right before her eyes. An enormous, terrifying shape breaches the pristine surface, sending a blinding spray of deep white snow into the freezing air. Screaming in sheer terror, Clara realizes the beast is literally swimming through the sand and rocketing straight toward them. The colossal creature violently surges past the party, forcing them to frantically dive out of its lethal, high-speed path. Gazing at the massive dorsal fin cutting through the snow, Yu curses loudly and questions why a giant shark is hunting in the desert. Recalling local legends, Yu warns the group that the beast tracks by sound and ruthlessly ambushes its unsuspecting prey. The surrounding snow begins to violently churn and rumble as the unseen predator rapidly closes the distance. Exploding into a dead sprint, Yu purposely draws the monster's absolute attention by shouting that he is the one it wants. Sprinting across the icy wasteland, Yu orders Katia to strictly watch over the rest of the girls while he acts as the primary bait. Katia firmly acknowledges the command, trusting that tracking the beast's movements will keep the rest of the party entirely safe. A sudden chill runs down Yu's spine as he glances back, his eyes widening at the horrifying sight closing in behind him. The monstrous snow shark erupts from the frozen depths, snapping its massive, razor-filled jaws directly at Yu's defenseless back. Cursing his grim situation, a sweating Yu desperately grips his weapon and realizes a direct confrontation is absolute suicide. He quickly visualizes that even if he flawlessly pierces the creature's head, its colossal momentum would easily crush him to death. Adapting on the fly, you completely abandons a frontal assault and formulates a reckless plan to strike its unprotected rear. The giant predator violently breaches the surface and plunges back down, momentarily exposing its massive tail to the young adventurer. Grunting with explosive effort, you swings his heavy blade but takes a brutal hit from the churning ice and snow. Sprawled in the freezing dirt, you groans through the pain and confidently reassures a panicked Clara that he is perfectly fine. Gritting his teeth in pure frustration, you realizes the hyper-intelligent beast is actively using the displaced sand as a defensive weapon. Watching the fin cautiously circle the huddled girls, you deduces the shark is deliberately avoiding a direct attack on their tight formation. He quickly theorizes that since the beast relies entirely on sound and cannot see above the sand, a noisy projectile could easily lure it out. Katia catches onto his brilliant tactical deduction, instantly realizing they need to throw something to create a highly distracting diversion. Sweating under the immense pressure, you frantically racks his brain to figure out what he can actually afford to sacrifice. Glancing at his carefully packed gear, he grimly acknowledges that throwing away their vital survival rations is simply not an option. Staring at the circling fin, you mentally calculates that he just needs a single dispensable object to perfectly fool the beast into striking. A highly dangerous realization flashes across Yu's face, prompting Katia to look at him with deep, growing concern. Stepping away from the safety of the group, a fearless Yu boldly declares that he is personally going in to finish the job. Utterly horrified by his suicidal resolve, Katia screams his name and desperately questions what the reckless captain is about to do. Keeping his gaze locked on the snowy horizon, Yu firmly instructs his companions to stay perfectly silent and simply watch the upcoming spectacle. The massive snow shark's dorsal fin violently slices through the icy terrain as it rapidly zeroes in on its newly chosen prey. Bracing himself against the biting polar wind, the young adventurer narrows his eyes with intense, calculating focus. Exploding into a sudden sprint, Yu fearlessly dashes across the frozen wasteland just as the colossal beast erupts from the snow directly behind him. Revealing that yesterday's hearty meal granted him a brand new ability, Yu aggressively taunts the monster while proudly declaring his bouncy new skill. Channeling intense magical energy into his legs, the young captain forcefully activates his repulsion ability to transform his body into a living rubber ball. Launching himself with explosive physical force, Yu violently bounces high into the freezing sky to completely evade the shark's massive, snapping jaws. Tracking his soaring aerial movement, a highly focused Katia locks her sharp gaze onto the massive, exposed beast waiting below. Dangling suspended in midair, Yu fiercely locks eyes with his companion and loudly signals that the perfect counterattack window is wide open. Screaming with high-octane battle readiness, Yu aggressively orders Katia to strike while the fierce mage instantly confirms she is absolutely ready. Gathering a terrifying amount of magical energy, Katia violently swings her arms forward to unleash her devastating grimoire spell. A blindingly powerful magical strike violently tears through the freezing air and forcefully impacts the massive predator's exposed flesh. A deafening eruption of dark blood and energy shatters the polar silence as the devastating magic completely obliterates the helpless beast. Flashing a brilliant, confident smile, Katia proudly praises her own devastating handiwork while Yu cheers enthusiastically from the snowy sidelines. Humbly deflecting his heavy praise, the talented mage directly credits Yu's incredible agility as the true reason their dangerous combination attack flawlessly succeeded. Sealing their explosive tactical victory, Yu and Katia share a triumphant, high-energy high-five over the frozen battlefield. Trembling in pure, unadulterated terror, Clara nervously reflects on how utterly massive and unpredictable the terrifying ambush truly was. Dragging his heavy pack toward the massive carcass, Yu cheerfully asks the exhausted team if they honestly think the giant monster is edible. Staring at the freshly slain beast, Katia eagerly agrees and loudly declares that the giant snow shark is officially on tonight's dinner menu. Flashing a wild, enthusiastic grin and gripping his jagged dagger, Yu boldly promises to quickly transform the terrifying predator into an absolutely delicious feast. Clapping his hands together with high-octane energy, Yu enthusiastically announces that it is finally time to begin their massive culinary prep. He marvels at the sheer absurdity of handling giant fish in a freezing desert while Katia, Clara, and Alicia cheer with explosive excitement. Building the anticipation, the young captain confidently reveals that their survival dinner menu will feature a simple but rich deep white meuniere. Gesturing grandly to the massive slab of harvested shark meat, you dramatically unveils the main course as raw sashimi. Katia and Clara lean in with sparkling, wide-eyed wonder as they gaze upon the beautifully pristine white flesh. Noticing Katia's slight hesitation regarding raw fish, you gently acknowledges her skepticism despite the dish's immense popularity in his homeland. He calmly reassures his team that nobody is forced to eat raw fish and considerately asks for their absolute consent before prepping. Pouting slightly at being babied, a fiercely determined Katia firmly demands he stop treating her like a child and declares absolute faith in his cooking. Touched by her unwavering trust, Yu softly apologizes and sincerely thanks the knight for placing her culinary faith in his hands. Flashing a brilliantly warm smile, the young leader philosophizes that sharing an incredible meal instantly elevates a perfect dish to legendary status. He warmly expresses his core belief that the true magic of cooking lies in the shared, joyous experience of eating together. Melted by his profound sincerity, the three girls beam with radiant smiles and absolutely agree that sharing a delicious feast is the ultimate comfort. Fired up by the team's incredible morale, Yu loudly shouts his battle cry to officially kick off their extreme survival cooking. Gripping his jagged survival blade, Yu laments not having a proper dismantling knife but readily accepts the harsh reality of their limited gear. Plunging the blade directly into the colossal shark carcass, he is utterly shocked by how smoothly the knife glides through without any resistance. The sharp steel violently carves through the pristine white flesh, effortlessly separating the massive layers of meat. Hoisting a massive fin into the freezing air, Yu debates testing it while Katia bluntly urges him to just eat the giant appendage. He quietly reflects on the immense time and grueling effort required to properly craft high-class fin delicacies back in his own world. Staring at the beautifully carved slab of raw shark, he notes its sponge-like texture is perfectly designed to absorb rich, savory broths. Formulating a brilliant culinary strategy, Yu definitively decides to save the precious fin to craft a deeply flavorful soup later. His mouth watering uncontrollably, the young chef drools over the absolutely unbelievable marbling of sweet fat hidden within the predator. The entire party stares in pure, breathless awe at the breathtakingly beautiful meat harvested from such a terrifyingly evil monster. A sudden wave of intense culinary despair washes over Yu as he bitterly curses his complete lack of authentic soy sauce. He desperately visualizes how a single drop of soy sauce mixed with this legendary fat would instantly ascend their taste buds to the heavens. Shaking off his intense depression, the resourceful chef accepts reality and decides he has absolutely no choice but to season it with simple salt. The girls gasp in pure, unadulterated confusion as Yu suddenly declares his plan to unleash a mysterious new ingredient. Reaching deep into his heavy survival pack, Yu triumphantly pulls out the pungent, jagged plant root he purchased back at the marketplace. Holding the leafy root, a deeply puzzled Katia questions if the bizarre plant is supposed to be a magical ward of protection. Closing his eyes in absolute bliss, Yu aggressively grinds the root against a washed stone and deeply inhales the fiercely spicy, nostalgic aroma. Mixing the freshly ground paste with salt, Yu proudly presents his handcrafted wasabi blend and boasts about its profoundly elegant depth. Raising his blade with sharp precision, Yu expertly slices the lean parts of the monster to prepare the meuniere. The culinary masterpieces are finally unveiled, showcasing beautiful plates of white shark sashimi and white shark meuniere. Blown away by his incredible speed, Clara listens eagerly as Yu suggests pairing the salted sashimi with the freshly grated amulet root. Politely declining the pungent root, Katia watches as Yu explains he had to prepare the fresh garnish before it completely lost its potency. Staring intently at the glistening meat, Katia temporarily swallows her lingering doubts and freely admits the dish looks undeniably appetizing. Clasping their hands together in perfect harmony, the grateful party cheerfully gives thanks before diving into the hard-earned feast. Taking her very first bite, Clara practically melts in pure culinary bliss as she relishes the incredibly fresh sashimi. Closing his eyes in absolute satisfaction, Yu warmly notes the shockingly sweet meat flawlessly melts right on his tongue. Coating the meat in the wasabi salt mixture, the group marvels at how the spicy kick completely neutralizes any lingering smell of blood. Explosive flavors wash over their senses, elevating the refreshing aroma and mild bitterness into a truly god-tier dining experience. A highly amused Yu warmly thanks Clara for her fiercely detailed food review while silently marveling at the superior quality of the monster meat. Shifting his absolute attention to the hot dish, a grinning Yu eagerly asks the girls how the meuniere is turning out. A metal fork effortlessly pierces the cooked meat, cleanly separating the tender white flesh in a cloud of savory steam. Clara smiles with pure joy, enthusiastically praising how the incredibly tender meat easily crumbles without any physical effort. Leaning into her hands with a soft smile, Alicia completely agrees and notes the rich, saucy portions simply dissolve right in her mouth. Blinking in mild surprise, Yu stares at the tiny girl and silently marvels at her highly advanced culinary vocabulary. Exhaling a deeply satisfied sigh, the weary adventurers sit back completely stuffed after demolishing the magnificent feast. Clara warmly points out that this breathtaking culinary experience is absolutely unique to the dangerous polar regions. Lying back lazily, a fully stuffed Clara cheerfully declares she could instantly fall into a deeply happy slumber. Snapping back to his leadership role, Yu points to the setting sun and firmly orders his fully recharged team to get moving. The quiet, freezing wind sweeps over the vast polar canyon as the heavily geared adventurers press forward into the twilight. Under a brilliantly starry sky, a sturdy shelter is expertly pitched against the harsh, biting winds of the frozen wasteland. Tucked warmly into their heavy sleeping bags, Yu and the girls drift into a deep, well-deserved rest. Stirring from his peaceful slumber, Yu suddenly sits up and peers through the dark, quiet tent. Stepping out into the freezing cold, a heavily bundled Yu finds Clara sitting quietly in the snow and asks what she is doing. Gazing upward with sparkling eyes, Clara softly whispers that the view is absolutely beautiful. A breathtaking canopy of glowing stars completely illuminates the majestic, snow-covered mountains towering above their tiny camp. Yu's eyes widen in pure, unadulterated awe as the majestic scale of the polar cosmos washes over him. Sitting comfortably beside Clara, Yu admits he was always too physically exhausted to ever notice the breathtaking scenery surrounding them. Staring into the sparkling night, Clara warmly confesses that sharing incredible food and experiencing this grand journey completely erased her intense fear of the polar world. Gazing into the quiet night, Clara softly admits she has been deeply curious about the mysterious Maori people from his distant homeland. Staring back at her in the peaceful snow, a slightly surprised Yu softly calls out her name. Looking out over the frozen wasteland, she confesses that the harsh reality of actually surviving in the polar region still has not fully sunken in. She reveals that just imagining her real parents looking up at the exact same sky fills her with an undeniable, fierce surge of courage. Flashing a remarkably warm smile, Yu reassures her with absolute certainty that they will definitely find her lost family. Hugging her knees with a gentle blush, Clara credits her current robust health entirely to the incredibly delicious meals Yu consistently prepares. Staring fondly at her captain, she marvels at the sheer, unimaginable variety of food that must exist back in his world. Blushing softly under the starry sky, she earnestly confesses her deep, burning desire to one day visit his home country herself. Yu freezes completely in the freezing air, his eyes widening as a sudden, heavy blush violently creeps across his stunned face. Recovering his composure with a nervous chuckle, he brushes off her frantic apology by gently reminding her that his multidimensional situation is highly complicated. Gazing up at the vast expanse of sparkling stars, Yu solemnly reflects on his own distant family and the shared sky above them. A deeply melancholic smile touches his lips as he quietly admits his lingering doubts about whether his family is actually looking up at the same stars. Shaking off the heavy nostalgia, he optimistically visualizes the distant day he can finally return home and gently prompts Clara to head back inside. Radiating pure, unadulterated joy, Clara beams brightly and enthusiastically agrees with her resilient captain. Letting out a long, satisfied groan, the young mage stretches her stiff muscles to shake off the biting polar cold. The peaceful atmosphere shatters instantly as Yu and Clara suddenly spot Katia and Alicia shamelessly peeking out from behind the tent flaps. Sweating profusely, a highly flustered Yu demands to know what they are doing while the shameless eavesdroppers casually urge him to continue his romantic moment. When an innocent Clara asks if they woke them up, a furious Yu violently screams that falling asleep is absolutely impossible with a captive audience watching their every move. The vast, sparkling cosmos stretches endlessly overhead as a soft voice completely agrees that the night sky is undeniably breathtaking. Yu blinks in sheer surprise as Katia suddenly steps forward, her expression shifting to deadly seriousness as she demands his absolute attention. Breaking her usual tough exterior, the fierce knight admits his cooking deeply encourages her too, formally declaring her excitement to work with him while Alicia sleepily agrees. Flashing a brilliant, heartwarming grin, An overjoyed Yu eagerly mirrors their profound sentiment and embraces their newly solidified team unity. Meanwhile, an ominous and highly unnatural energy silently pulses from the jagged mouth of a massive, shadowed cavern in the freezing distance. Terrifying dark mana violently swirls through the air, signaling a massive, unseen danger lurking deep within the uncharted polar region. The chilling atmosphere lingers heavily over the icy wasteland as the latest chapter of their highly perilous polar expedition officially draws to a close. Staring at the massive, jagged cavern opening, the group stands completely frozen in awe. Looking highly uneasy at the ominous entrance, Katia and Yu quietly acknowledge the terrifying atmosphere. Yu nervously remarks that the sprawling cavern looks exactly like a giant predator waiting with its mouth wide open. Peering into the absolute darkness, the young leader admits the terrifying void is practically drawing him in. A silent, freezing breeze sweeps across the snowy landscape as they weigh their perilous options. Katia logically deduces that since ancient humans lived in caves, it would not be surprising to find lost civilization ruins inside. Turning to his hesitant team, Yu eagerly asks for their thoughts while strongly advocating for an immediate investigation. Clara firmly meets his gaze, boldly declaring she has already decided to follow wherever her captain leads. Katia agrees with the unanimous decision but strictly demands they test the dangerous waters before blindly rushing in. Winding up his arm, Yu aggressively hurls a solid rock deep into the dark, uncharted abyss. A sharp clatter echoes from the darkness, flawlessly proving the physical depth of the cavern. Yu firmly reminds the girls that blindly bumping into unknown horrors in the dark is a terrifying and fatal mistake. He proudly notes it is always better to be perfectly safe, prompting a heavily relieved Katia to thank him for his caution. Raising a brilliantly blazing torch, Yu explains that the deeper they go, the more visibility will completely vanish. He expertly demonstrates that the open flame serves a vital secondary purpose by acting as a toxic gas detector. Flashing a confident smile, Yu mentions carbon dioxide, leaving the baffled girls utterly confused by his foreign scientific terminology. Casually dismissing their utter confusion for another time, the young captain boldly orders his team to march forward. The heavily geared party cautiously steps into the massive underground tunnel, completely swallowed by the ancient rock. A sprawling, glowing mass of strange flora violently illuminates the cavern walls in a hauntingly beautiful display. Yu instantly recognizes the phenomenon as Hikari moss, a bizarre magical plant that independently emits a brilliant light. He silently marvels at the massive difference from his home world, noting that earth moss only reflects light instead of producing it. Without warning, a sudden gust of wind violently flickers the bright flame of his wooden torch. Yu quickly calculates that the flowing breeze means the cave definitely connects to another opening somewhere far away. A wild, high-octane grin spreads across Yu's face as the absolute thrill of real exploration completely overtakes him. A dark, intensely ominous aura violently interrupts his pure excitement. Analyzing the environment, Yu realizes the warm temperatures, flowing water, and bright light create the absolute perfect conditions for life. Despite the flawless survival environment, he chillingly notes there is absolutely zero sign of humans or even demons. Stopping dead in his tracks, a deeply unsettled Yu desperately questions the overwhelmingly weird feeling suffocating him. His blazing torch wildly illuminates the jagged, terrifying textures of the surrounding stone. Completely oblivious to his rising dread, Katia loudly marvels at the breathtaking beauty of the glowing cavern. Yu's blood runs entirely cold as a horrifying realization violently crashes down upon his racing mind. The massive, jagged cave walls suddenly appear far more flesh-like and biological than standard stone. Katia cheerfully suggests this would be a wonderful place to build a home, entirely missing the terrifying truth. A deeply unsettled Alicia suddenly stops in her tracks, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. Trembling violently with fear, the tiny girl points ahead and desperately asks Yu what in the world is standing before them. Yu's pupils shrink to terrified pinpricks as absolute, paralyzing horror completely takes over. Massive, razor-sharp fangs violently gleam in the shadows as the true, horrifying nature of the cavern is finally exposed. A colossal, multi-eyed monster towers menacingly over the trapped adventurers, proving they literally just walked straight into its jaws. Staring wide-eyed in sheer disbelief, a heavily sweating Yu gasps in pure dread as a terrifying new threat reveals itself. The entire party stands perfectly frozen in place, completely overwhelmed by the colossal presence looming before them in the ancient cavern. Gripping her massive heavy sword, Katia frantically screams that she has never even heard of such a terrifying demon before. Yu sharply recalls their previous brutal battle, remembering the fierce, fiery anger he clearly saw in the dragon's eyes. He chillingly notes that the massive beast before them completely lacks any natural emotion, possessing cold eyes that look exactly like a lifeless engine. A grim realization washes over the young captain as he deduces the towering monster operates exactly like a soulless machine. The tense, freezing silence is violently shattered as the colossal creature suddenly twitches into lethal motion. Exploding forward with terrifying speed, the massive armored crab brutally lunges at the retreating party as Yu desperately grabs Alicia to protect her. The agile adventurers frantically dive out of the way just as a colossal, razor-sharp claw violently crushes the rocky floor where they stood. Panting heavily, Katia realizes the monster's sheer, overwhelming power perfectly explains why the massive cave is completely devoid of life. Staring down the giant predator, Yu bitterly curses himself for not realizing that previous adventurers were either too afraid to enter or were instantly devoured. Taking immediate tactical command, Yu firmly orders Clara and Alicia to stay perfectly safe in the backline while he handles the frontline. The fierce knight firmly readies her weapon and urgently asks her trusted captain what their grand combat strategy is. Yu boldly declares he will act as the ultimate decoy while Katia flanks the beast, prompting her to exasperatedly call him as reckless as ever. Channeling intense magical energy, the young leader simultaneously activates his attraction and hardening skills to draw the monster's absolute attention. Gripping his jagged dragonclaw spear, a fearless Yu violently dashes straight into the lethal danger zone. Shocked by the creature's unresponsiveness, Yu aggressively shouts for the beast to look his way and take the bait. A highly frustrated Katia narrowly evades a brutal attack, frantically realizing that Yu's magical lure is completely failing to draw the monster's aggro. The fierce knight leaps backward with explosive agility as the giant pincer violently slams into the freezing earth. Analyzing its terrifyingly precise movements, Katia deduces the mechanical beast is simply using a location tracking method to prioritize the absolute closest targets. Yu realizes the terrifying predator operates with cold logic, actively prioritizing physical proximity completely over his attractive magic. Shouting his confirmation, Yu commands Katia to get closer and strictly look for an opening while he distracts it. Yu violently clashes his jagged spear against the monster's thick shell, desperately trying to break through its dense armor. Sweating under the immense pressure, Yu mentally calculates that even with his hardening skill applied, he won't survive a single direct hit and must avoid it entirely. Screaming with high-octane battle energy, Katia brings her massive heavy sword crashing down onto the beast in a devastating overhead strike. Trembling from the intense physical recoil, a highly frustrated Katia groans as her overwhelming strike completely fails to pierce the impossibly tough armor. Cursing loudly, Yu realizes the terrifying monster can effortlessly withstand that kind of heavy attack without taking a single scratch. Springing high into the freezing air, Yu desperately maneuvers to evade the relentless, crushing claw strikes. A massive, spiked shadow suddenly looms over the young captain as a lethal, scorpion-like tail violently arches right behind him. Utterly paralyzed by the impending strike, a terrified Yu locks eyes with the deadly stinger and whispers a desperate curse. Violently swinging his jagged weapon, Yu deflects a massive incoming attack to buy his team some crucial time. Katia screams his name in pure terror as Yu crashes into the cave wall, though he instantly shouts back that he is perfectly fine. A terrifying explosion of razor-sharp ice crystals violently erupts from the ground mere inches away from the young captain. Narrowly avoiding the lethal, jagged ice spikes, Yu desperately rolls out of the way as the freezing magic shatters the stone beneath him. The colossal crab monster arches its stinger, dripping a deeply ominous, freezing liquid onto the cavern floor. Frantically warning his companion, Yu violently orders Katia to watch out for the tail and never let the frozen liquid touch her. With terrifying speed, the massive beast thrusts its giant pincer forward, intent on completely crushing the agile adventurers. Yu and Katia transform into blurring shadows, desperately dodging a relentless, high-speed barrage of lethal pincer strikes. The heavy claw violently slams into the earth, forcing Katia to leap backward in pure shock to evade the crushing blow. Springing into the air with explosive agility, Yu gracefully vaults over the massive appendage as it shatters the ground beneath him. Sweating under the intense pressure, Yu mentally calculates that even with his hardening skill, a single catch from those freezing claws means absolute death. The giant armored crab viciously resets its combat stance, towering over the agile adventurers with unyielding, mechanical malice. Processing a sudden tactical shift, Katia firmly grips her weapon and agrees that a new strategy is a genuinely good idea. Glancing back at her unusually quiet companion, Katia asks what is wrong as a fierce determination builds in her eyes. Flashing back to her magical grimoire studies, Katia stubbornly recalls her solemn promise to never drag you down in battle again. Her eyes blazing with an unshakable, fiery resolve, the fierce knight vows to prove her own strength right here and now. Leaping high into the freezing air, Katia unleashes a devastating, heavy sword strike against the monster's thick arm with a furious shout. The crab's lethal tail instantly snaps forward, firing a high-speed projectile of freezing liquid directly at the overextended knight. Exploding into motion, Yu fearlessly dives into the line of fire, violently sweeping Katia into his arms to dodge the lethal blast. Carried safely out of the blast zone, Katia blushes in utter shock as she stares wide-eyed at her heroic captain. Hiding safely behind a jagged rock, Yu apologizes for the rough rescue while Katia rationally points out that their blind attacks are completely useless. Pulling a broken spike from his heavy coat, Yu groans about the intense pain and casually jokes that he always struggled with crabs back on Earth. A deeply nostalgic smirk crosses his face as he remembers that despite their tough shells, crabs always tasted the absolute best. Snapping back to deadly seriousness, Yu formulates a brilliant plan and instructs Katia to specifically target the monster's unprotected joints. He asks if she can pull off the precise strike, prompting Katia to fiercely lock eyes with him and challenge his doubts. Yu logically explains that while he possesses superior physical speed and strength, Katia's vast combat experience makes her the perfect executioner. Flashing a brilliantly confident smile, the young leader formally declares his absolute trust in Katia and kicks off their ultimate counterattack. Bursting from their rocky cover, Yu aggressively channels his energy and dashes straight into the danger zone to act as the ultimate decoy. The colossal beast instantly locks onto Yu's reckless sprint, completely ignoring Katia as she stealthily maneuvers behind its massive, armored bulk. The monster's tail violently unloads another freezing barrage at Yu, completely unaware of the lethal strike descending rapidly from its blind spot. Flashing a confident smirk, Yu aggressively weaves through a deadly barrage of claw strikes to clash his jagged spear against the massive beast. Seizing the perfect opening, a fiercely determined Katia dashes straight toward the monster's exposed flank with her heavy sword ready. Screaming that she will cut the beast down, the fierce knight unleashes a devastating high-octane downward slash. The razor-sharp steel bites brutally deep into the relatively soft tissue at the back of the creature's joint, generating a sickening crack. The colossal crab violently staggers backward as the devastating strike completely severs its structural defenses. Flashing a triumphant grin, Yu excitedly praises Katia for flawlessly piercing the softer tissue hidden behind the monster's heavily armored joints. Unfazed by the crippling damage, the terrifying crab monster violently clicks its jagged mandibles with absolute, soulless malice. Exploding into rapid evasive maneuvers, Yu effortlessly vaults over a massive claw while Katia expertly ducks under the colossal limb. Towering ominously above the battlefield, the crippled beast viciously rears up, completely ignoring its pain as it acts mechanical to a fault. A highly confident smirk touches Yu's lips as he deduces that treating the beast like a machine guarantees its combat performance will rapidly degrade with every shattered joint. Channeling explosive battle energy, Yu roars his command for Katia to launch their ultimate counterattack, prompting her to violently rocket forward. The colossal crab monster aggressively arches its venomous stinger as the two agile adventurers rapidly close the distance across the massive cavern. Transforming into a lethal projectile, Katia accelerates to terrifying speeds across the frozen cavern floor while aggressively dragging her heavy sword. Executing their flawless flank maneuver, Katia zeroes in on the lower defenses while a fearless Yu violently launches himself into the air. A shared, brilliant smile of absolute trust violently connects the two skilled adventurers as they perfectly synchronize their lethal two-pronged assault. Deceived by Yu's explosive aerial distraction, the mechanical beast violently shifts its full attention toward the young captain, leaving its underside entirely exposed. Knowing the beast has fully taken the bait, Katia flashes a fierce smirk and prepares to violently end the brutal fight. The triumphant atmosphere shatters instantly as Katia's confident smirk violently drops into an expression of pure, unadulterated terror at an unseen anomaly. A desperate, frantic scream violently echoes through the massive cavern, completely halting the adventurer's lethal momentum. Watching the brutal battle from the safety of the backline, Clara and Alicia freeze in absolute horror as a terrifying new development unfolds before them. Dropping to her knees, Katia tightly clasps her hands together over a glowing magic circle to begin an intense magical incantation. Closing her eyes in deep concentration, the fierce knight gathers a massive orb of blinding magical energy between her hands. Yu aggressively shouts that her chanting will not finish in time as the colossal crab monster violently bears down on them. The massive armored predator violently rears up, raising its giant, crushing pincers high into the freezing air. Bracing his jagged spear against the impending strike, Yu stares up at the towering shadow and realizes the sheer gravity of their situation. Observing the desperate clash from a distance, Alicia accurately confirms her tactical suspicions about the monster's state. The tiny girl boldly declares her intention to temporarily pass out so her slumber magic can fully take effect if the enemy loses its fighting spirit. Her piercing gaze locks onto the mechanical monster, radiating an intense and overwhelming aura of magical supremacy. Screaming with explosive battle energy, Katia violently unleashes her devastating ballista spell toward the towering crab. The devastating magical strike violently impacts the massive creature, blasting directly into its armored face with pinpoint precision. All washes over Yu as he watches the blinding magical explosion and marvels at the sheer destructive power. Catching her breath, Katia smiles warmly and reassures her captain, fiercely urging him to do his absolute best to finish the fight. A brilliantly confident smile spreads across Yu's face as he firmly grips his dragonclaw spear. Exploding into a synchronized assault, Yu and Katia transform into a blinding blur of coordinated destruction. Flashing fierce expressions of absolute synergy, the two adventurers flawlessly execute their lethal combination attack. As a severed piece of massive armor crashes down, Katia coldly points out that the mechanical beast is completely incapable of moving without its limbs. The monster's remaining jagged legs violently tremble and twitch as its shattered chassis struggles to support its own massive weight. The triumphant atmosphere shatters instantly as a massive, lethal shadow suddenly drops right behind the vulnerable backline. Clara and Alicia freeze in absolute shock as the creature's venomous tail violently plummets toward them. Spinning around in pure terror, Clara frantically screams for Alicia to run away right this instant. A chilling, oppressive darkness violently suffocates the freezing air as the absolute certainty of impending death looms heavily over the tiny skill holder. Dark memories violently surge to the surface, echoing a cold introduction from her tragic, confined past. A bright-eyed young girl cheerfully encourages a smaller Alicia in the pristine, artificial environment of their cruel laboratory prison. Sharing a rare moment of genuine warmth, the young girl earnestly confesses her burning desire to one day see the outside world. Smiling brightly, the doomed child waves a warm goodbye and promises to see Alicia tomorrow as she is taken away for experiments. The innocent memory violently shifts to a horrifyingly grim reality as Alicia stands silently alongside two researchers staring down at a lifeless body. A researcher callously pulls back the sheet, coldly dismissing the dead child as just another failed experiment. A dark narration philosophizes that the horrifying concept of death is incredibly difficult to truly grasp even when a lifeless body is resting right in front of you. Snapping violently back to the perilous present, a deeply horrified Alicia stares up at the descending mechanical stinger with absolute terror. Clara's desperate scream echoes through the massive cavern as Alicia drops helplessly to her knees beneath the deadly tail. The colossal, razor-sharp stinger violently plummets toward the frozen earth, bringing absolute death with it. Exploding into the frame with blinding speed, a fearless Yu violently intercepts the deadly strike right before it crushes a paralyzed Alicia. Channeling explosive power into his leg, the young captain unleashes a devastating upward kick directly into the monster's lethal appendage. A deafening shockwave violently shatters the surrounding air as his fierce physical strike forcefully collides with the beast's dense armor. Narrowing his eyes with terrifying, unyielding focus, Yu completely locks onto his towering mechanical prey. Opening his mouth wide, Yu unleashes his terrifying dragon breath ability, blasting the crippled monster with a point-blank explosion of searing magical energy. Violently wrapping his arms around the tiny girl, Yu forcefully tackles Alicia out of the devastating blast radius to keep her perfectly safe. Shielding her from the chaotic debris, the desperate captain aggressively screams Katia's name at the top of his lungs. Locking onto her perfect opening, a fiercely determined Katia confidently declares that the brutal battle is finally over. Plunging from the sky like a falling meteor, the fierce knight violently drives her massive heavy sword directly into the monster's cracked shell. Blinding light and shattered armor violently erupt from the impact zone as the overwhelming strike completely obliterates the beast's core. Ripping her heavy blade free from the wreckage, Katia flawlessly lands as the colossal crab monster violently breaks apart. The agile adventurers gracefully touch down on the frozen cavern floor, leaving the shattered mechanical predator completely ruined behind them. A thunderous crash echoes through the ancient cave as the dismembered, armored behemoth violently collapses into absolute defeat. The monster's severed, jagged legs twitch frantically before slamming lifelessly onto the cold stone, officially ending its mechanical terror. Panting heavily from the brutal exertion, Katia and you catch their breath while a relieved Clara watches from the rocky sidelines. Exhausted laughter escapes their lips as the sheer, adrenaline-fueled reality of their absolute victory finally washes over them. Sheathing her heavy weapon, Katia flashes a brilliantly warm, triumphant smile directly at her fearless captain. Mirroring her unshakable trust, a completely exhausted you smiles brightly and flashes a confident thumbs up to his fierce companion. The overwhelming adrenaline completely fades, causing a terrified Alicia to violently collapse into the snow while trembling uncontrollably. Tears streaming down her flushed face, the tiny girl looks up at you and desperately asks why he would ever risk his own life to save hers. Weeping openly in pure confusion, she aggressively questions why he would save her when helping a useless test subject brings him absolutely no benefit. Scratching his cheek with an awkward but remarkably gentle warmth, you softly searches for the right words to comfort the broken child. Flashing a brilliantly pure smile, the young leader simply answers that he saved her because they are officially friends. Kneeling down to her eye level, you warmly explains that he wanted to help her, fully ignoring logic, impossible odds, or personal benefit. Beaming with unwavering kindness, he cheerfully concludes that his simple desire to protect her is the only reason he will ever need. Shutting her eyes tightly, a profoundly moved Alicia finally lets her emotional walls crumble as warm tears flow freely down her cheeks. Gently patting her head, you comforts the crying child as she softly whispers her heartfelt thanks for his absolute, unconditional kindness. Shattering the heavy emotional atmosphere, an exhausted you instantly complains about his fatigue and aggressively declares they are having dinner right here. Staring deadpan at his immediate shift in priorities, Clara and Katia blankly praise you's completely predictable, food-driven mindset. A massive cheer echoes through the glowing cavern as the fired-up party happily declares they are having a giant crab feast today. His face locked in fierce determination, you takes a deep, steadying breath to mentally prepare himself for the monumental culinary task ahead. Watching intently from the sidelines, Katia loudly cheers for her captain to successfully pull off the impossible maneuver. Resting on the colossal shell, you reflects on Katia's breathtaking sword strike, utterly amazed by the sheer concentration required to execute such a flawless swing. Shaking off his exhaustion, you completely lights up with pure excitement as he marvels at the incredible potential of their fresh catch. A breathtaking, pristine slab of thick meat is gloriously unveiled as you triumphantly declares that the massive crab leg is finally peeled. Flashing a brilliant smile, you cheerfully announces an absolute feast consisting of raw sashimi, perfectly grilled crab, and rich crab shabu. Dropping a heavy pot onto the campfire, the young chef expertly explains his plan to craft a deeply flavorful broth using fish and crushed crab shells. Sizzling sounds fill the air as you grills the meat directly on its massive shell, causing a mesmerized Katia to visibly gulp in raw anticipation. A deeply comforting warmth washes over the entire party as they gather closely around the roaring campfire to admire the mouth-watering feast. The ultimate polar survival meal is officially completed, showcasing breathtakingly beautiful plates of fresh crab sashimi and perfectly grilled meat. Clara, Alicia, and Katia lean forward with sparkling, wide-eyed wonder, completely mesmerized by the glowing culinary masterpiece set before them. Katia enthusiastically praises the glowing meat as a sparkling jewel, while a hesitant Alicia nervously questions if such a majestic thing is actually edible. Clara stares intently at the raw sashimi, a heavy trail of drool shamelessly escaping her lips as her fierce appetite completely takes over. Demonstrating the legendary crab shabu technique, you cheerfully instructs the baffled girls to simply dip the raw meat into the boiling pot just once. A massive slab of pristine crab meat is gently submerged into the bubbling broth, gracefully swishing through the rich, savory liquid. The three girls stare in absolute, breathless silence, their eyes perfectly tracking the mesmerizing movement of the cooking meat. Pulling the meat from the broth, you proudly showcases the perfectly cooked flesh as it spectacularly fans out like a beautiful blooming flower. Clasping their hands together with high-octane excitement, the grateful adventurers joyfully give thanks and immediately dive into the hard-earned feast. Opening their mouths incredibly wide, Katia and Clara eagerly sink their teeth directly into the massive, steaming crab legs. You and Alicia follow suit, passionately biting into the tender meat as the rich, savory flavors violently explode across their taste buds. The entire party completely freezes in place, their pupils shrinking in pure, unadulterated shock at the overwhelmingly delicious taste. Melting into absolute culinary bliss, the girls passionately praise the elegantly rich and refreshingly sweet flavor profile of the perfectly cooked crab. Closing her eyes in deep, genuine comfort, a deeply moved Clara softly whispers that the rich aroma is incredibly refreshing. Savoring every single chew, you warmly notes the flawless texture and marvels at how the sweet flavor completely envelopes his tongue. Sweating nervously with a heavy blush, and overwhelmed you wildly wonders if the incredibly soft texture is exactly what kissing feels like. His heart violently pounding in his chest, the young captain quietly munches on his food while trying to process his highly embarrassing thoughts. Tears of pure joy streaming down her face, an ecstatic Clara boldly declares that every single bite violently transports her to an entirely different world. Leaning his head back to take another massive bite, you aggressively devours the crab while praising the absolute essence of its rich sweetness. The campfire warmly illuminates the cavern as a highly focused Katia holds her raw crab meat directly over the boiling pot. Hesitating fiercely, Katia nervously questions if she should really boil such flawless sashimi, but you aggressively encourages her to take the delicious plunge. Gently swishing the deeply scored crab meat through the boiling broth, the pristine flesh begins to rapidly cook and flawlessly transform. Pulling the massive meat from the pot, the perfectly cooked crab spectacularly fans out into an incredibly beautiful, blooming culinary flower. The three girls lean forward with sparkling, wide-eyed wonder, completely mesmerized by the breathtaking visual display. Flashing a highly confident smile, you proudly declares the dish complete as the girls stare in pure, unadulterated awe. Opening her mouth incredibly wide, an eager Alicia takes a massive, highly anticipated bite of the steaming crab meat. Melting into absolute culinary bliss, a deeply satisfied Clara warmly praises how the rich broth flawlessly absorbed into the tender meat. Showering her captain with high-octane praise, she aggressively declares you an absolute genius for engineering the perfect crab shabu technique. Smiling with pure joy, Katia passionately highlights the exquisite, undeniable harmony perfectly balanced between the hot, cooked exterior and sweet, raw interior. The entire party completely surrenders to their fierce appetites, aggressively devouring the legendary feast with intense, rapid chews. Watching the girls violently stuff their cheeks, a heavily surprised you blinks as a sudden, absolute silence completely takes over the lively camp. Chewing with unbridled joy, the fiercely focused adventurers remain entirely consumed by the overwhelming god-tier flavor of the polar crab. A highly amused smirk crosses Yu's face as he scientifically deduces that the universal rule of people becoming dead silent while eating crab flawlessly applies to this magical world. Chuckling warmly to himself, the young leader silently rejoices in his team's absolute, undeniable happiness. The weary adventurers sit comfortably around the crackling campfire, totally engrossed in demolishing the magnificent, hard-earned feast. A massive pile of completely emptied crab shells rests heavily on the grill, serving as absolute proof of their devastatingly thorough meal. Slumping back into a heavy food coma, a completely stuffed Katia and Clara admit that the sheer deliciousness has violently obliterated their entire vocabulary. Clasping her hands together with a remarkably pure smile, a deeply grateful Alicia earnestly gives her profound thanks for the life-changing meal. Taking absolute tactical command, Yu formally concludes the massive feast and firmly orders his fully stuffed team to finally get some sleep. A sturdy, secure survival tent is expertly pitched on the cold cavern floor, providing an absolute safe haven against the harsh polar environment. Tucked warmly into their heavy sleeping bags, the completely satisfied group collectively sighs in deep, undeniable comfort over the lingering taste of dinner. The peaceful atmosphere is instantly shattered as Yu, Katia, and Alicia suddenly snap their absolute attention toward a highly unexpected movement. Peeking over in mild concern, the group gently asks Clara if she is perfectly all right after she abruptly shifts in her warm sleeping bag. Blushing heavily with a deeply emotional expression, Clara softly apologizes and vulnerably confesses that the unbelievably delicious meal triggered an overwhelming wave of pure happiness. Beaming with a brilliantly radiant smile, the courageous young mage passionately declares that the warm food granted her the absolute strength to boldly take another step forward tomorrow. Touched by her profound sincerity, Yu and Katia smile warmly and fiercely agree that maintaining such an unshakable, positive mindset is completely vital. Feeling a deep, undeniable sense of emotional security, a heavily relieved Clara gracefully settles back down into her cozy sleeping bag. Closing her eyes with absolute, unwavering peace, the brave young girl softly whispers a beautifully gentle goodnight to her trusted companions. Flashing a remarkably tender and highly protective smile, Yu softly wishes his precious team a genuinely good night in return. Utterly exhausted from the brutal monster battle and massive culinary prep, the fearless captain finally closes his eyes and drifts into a deep, well-deserved slumber. The glowing, magical cavern remains entirely peaceful as the brave adventurers perfectly rest and recover for the highly perilous polar journey awaiting them tomorrow. The following morning, the fully recharged adventurers confidently resume their deep underground expedition through the twisting, ancient cavern. Beaming with high-octane energy, Clara and Katia happily reminisce about how absolutely delicious their massive crab feast was last night. Smiling warmly but maintaining his tactical awareness, Yu strictly warns the group not to let their guard down since the uncharted path ahead is completely unpredictable. Stepping cautiously through a narrow passage, the group's eyes widen in pure awe as they discover yet another massive, sprawling cavern opening up before them. The young adventurers freeze in absolute astonishment as they spot the unmistakable wooden silhouettes of a lost, underground village. Overwhelmed by a desperate surge of hope, a fiercely determined Clara suddenly breaks formation and violently sprints toward the ancient settlement. Yu shouts her name in sudden alarm as the eager mage recklessly dashes through the ruined, wooden gates of the mysterious village. Clara scrambles frantically through the collapsed, dilapidated structures, desperately searching the ruins for any lingering signs of human life. Cupping her hands together, she screams at the top of her lungs for anybody to answer, but her desperate pleas are met with absolute, suffocating silence. Her bright hopes violently shattered, a deeply crestfallen Clara lowers her head and softly apologizes as the grim reality of the empty village washes over her. She melancholically admits her desperate wish to finally find a surviving member of the lost Maori people hidden within these ancient walls. Scanning the dilapidated environment, Katia rationally notes the crude, basic architecture was clearly built to provide only the absolute bare minimum required for harsh survival. Visualizing the grim history of the lost people, Katia chillingly theorizes that the settlement wasn't merely abandoned, but rather reached a tragic, definitive end. Despite the morbid atmosphere, she gently comforts Clara by pointing out that finding these ruins is absolute proof that human life once existed here. Yu stares solemnly at the wreckage, grimly reflecting on how the lost villagers barely managed to survive before ultimately succumbing to their harsh reality. Making a heavy tactical decision, Yu officially orders the team to stop searching for living survivors and instead focus entirely on uncovering their lingering traces. Accepting the harsh truth, Clara softly agrees with her captain as the group cautiously begins investigating the scattered, ancient debris. The quiet investigation is suddenly interrupted as a sharp-eyed Katia loudly calls out to the group and eagerly points toward a massive new discovery. Looming ominously in the shadows, the adventurers find themselves standing before a highly unusual, sturdy stone structure that violently stands out from the wooden ruins. Examining the ancient ruins, the group discovers a single, highly unusual building constructed entirely out of sturdy stone instead of basic wood. Staring at the heavy stone entrance, the baffled adventurers nervously wonder how they are supposed to pry the massive barricade open. Katia notes that since even Yu's overwhelming physical strength couldn't budge it, they have absolutely no choice but to forcefully break it down. Stepping forward with absolute confidence, the tiny skill holder Alicia raises her hand and prepares to unleash her powerful magic. A massive, glowing magic circle violently flares to life against the stone door as Alicia channels her immense, concentrated power. A heavy rumble violently shakes the underground ruins as the thick stone barrier miraculously slides open under the magical pressure. Peeking cautiously into the dark interior, the heavily geared group slowly enters the mysterious, hidden stone chamber. Sweeping the dark room, they grimly confirm that the hidden shelter is completely devoid of any lingering signs of human life. Illuminating the suffocating darkness with his blazing torch, a highly curious Yu discovers an ancient stone desk resting in the center of the room. Yu's eyes widen in pure, unadulterated excitement as he loudly shouts that he has found a pair of heavily worn ancient books. Brushing off the thick dust, Yu admits he can only make out a few characters and asks if anyone else can decipher the foreign text. Stepping closer to the ancient texts, Clara examines the cover and softly reveals that the mysterious book is definitively labeled as a journal. Opening the heavy book, Clara discovers the text is written in a completely non-existent language but reveals a highly unique magical mechanism. She explains the journal is enchanted with a highly specific translation spell perfectly designed to only work for members of her own people. Translating the ancient text, Clara reads that the journal documents the tragic end of one of the many branches of the great Maori tree. A profound, heavy silence washes over the room as Clara reads the final entry, prompting a deeply sympathetic Yu to gently apologize for her loss. Hot tears violently stream down Clara's flushed cheeks as the absolutely devastating reality of her ancestors' grim fate completely shatters her hopes. Recovering her composure, Clara solemnly translates that her people were ruthlessly hunted and forced out of their homeland because of their legendary, immortal healing powers. Seeking absolute refuge, the exiled Maori people ultimately fled into this harsh, uncharted underground cavern to escape their relentless pursuers. Clara reveals that the hidden settlement was initially thriving until the colossal crab monster, the Grand Kion, violently claimed the cavern as its territory. The horrifying translation confirms the giant predator completely trapped the villagers inside, stripping them of absolutely any chance to escape. Closing her eyes in deep sorrow, Clara explains that being completely cut off from food and vital resources slowly and inevitably wiped out the trapped survivors. Processing the heavy revelation, Yu logically deduces that since Clara can flawlessly read the restricted text, she is undeniably a true descendant of the lost Maori clan. Smiling through her warm tears, Clara formally and deeply thanks Yu on behalf of all the lost souls who perished in the dark cavern. She profoundly expresses her absolute gratitude, thanking the fearless captain for finally avenging her ancestors by slaying the terrifying Grand Kion. Staring at her with wide eyes, a deeply moved Yu is momentarily rendered completely speechless by the heavy, emotional weight of her heartfelt thanks. Clutching the precious journal tightly to her chest, a beautifully radiant smile completely washes away Clara's lingering sorrow. Blushing slightly, Yu awkwardly struggles to find the right words while the heavy, melancholic atmosphere slowly begins to lift. Yu suddenly notices a bizarre phenomenon, loudly pointing out that the mysterious letters inside the ancient journal are actively glowing in the dark. Katia aggressively shouts in pure shock that the journal is actually a magic book, as Clara prepares to reveal the true depth of its ancient secrets. Holding the ancient journal, Clara reveals the artifact is a rare magic book, a powerful device specifically designed to help conjure magic. She explains the book manifests powerful magic by passing mana directly through letters inscribed with a specific chant, perfectly demonstrating the devastating icicle spell. A massive, towering pillar of jagged ice violently erupts from the frozen earth, showcasing the sheer, terrifying power of the ancient magic. The entire party stares in pure, breathless awe as the colossal ice structure completely dominates the ancient, ruined cavern. Katia is highly praised for flawlessly managing to pull off such an overwhelmingly powerful spell with just a single word, even with the book's absolute magical support. Staring at the glowing text, Clara confirms the devastating icicle spell was originally concocted and perfected by the ancient Maori people. Katia logically deduces she was only able to cast the spell because she previously ate the Grand Kion, realizing the magic captures the mana attributes of ancient, powerful demons. Clara reads further, revealing this legendary power is officially known as ancient magic and is strictly obtained by eating monsters classified as ancient species. The heavy truth is finally unveiled as Clara explains the Maori people originally fled to completely hide this dangerous, world-altering knowledge from the main continent. A highly frustrated Katia laments that if she had known how to use the icicle spell earlier, she could have easily fought off the terrifying mechanical monster. Clara explicitly connects the dots, confirming that eating an ancient species flawlessly grants the user its exact corresponding magical attribute. Staring directly at their fearless captain, the girls suddenly realize Yu's bizarre culinary habits perfectly mirror the legendary magic. A heavily sweating Yu freezes completely in place, his eyes widening in pure shock as the girls slowly piece together his terrifying secret. Reading from the journal, Clara discovers a historical passage about an ancient man who ruled storms by wielding the horns of a wind dragon, suggesting a massive connection. She immediately links the ancient legend directly to Yu's explosive charge ability, noting his frequent and devastating use of monster parts in combat. A baffled Yu listens closely as Clara reveals the ancient text also explicitly describes the dirks, proving the magical rules are not always the exact same. The journal specifically highlights the dirk's strong legs, accumulated physical strength, and glowing antlers of light. Clara logically theorizes that even if you cannot physically absorb the magical power, he can flawlessly channel it by wielding the demon's body parts as a physical weapon. A look of profound, heavy realization washes over Yu's face as the true, underlying mechanics of his extraordinary survival gear are finally exposed. Staring at his jagged spear, Yu solemnly reflects that he always intuitively felt a demon's true power came directly from using its crafted weapons in battle. Connecting the dots to their recent battle, Yu suddenly questions if his combat theory perfectly applies to the terrifying Grand Kion they defeated yesterday. A sudden wave of profound realization washes over the young captain as the sheer scale and implications of the ancient magic fully click in his mind. Breaking the silence, a deeply impressed Katia confidently declares she always knew Yu was absolutely amazing and full of surprises. She enthusiastically predicts their ongoing journey will uncover incredibly fascinating things now that they understand the ancient magic. Redirecting their focus back to the ancient journal, Yu notices Clara looking downcast and gently asks her what is bothering her. Holding the glowing text, a solemn Clara reveals the journal explicitly entrusts the powerful demon book to whoever can read its lost language. As the lone known survivor of the Maori tribe, she feels an overwhelming, heavy burden to single-handedly carry on her people's ancient legacy. Gazing down at the heavy book, a deeply insecure Clara vulnerably confesses she lacks the strength to successfully pass on the knowledge. A melancholic shadow falls over her face as she tragically compares herself to the lost villagers, doubting she will survive long enough to leave a legacy behind. She heartbreakingly admits her absolute failure as a Maori, revealing she couldn't even master basic healing magic like the rest of her fallen clan. Completely lacking any special combat skills or physical prowess, the tiny mage heavily criticizes her own extreme vulnerability in the harsh polar world. Shedding tears of pure gratitude, Clara earnestly confesses that she never would have survived this brutal journey without Yu's absolute protection and warmth. Violently shattering her melancholic spiral, a heavily blushing Yu aggressively shouts her name and demands her absolute clarity. Staring fiercely into her eyes, the fearless captain strictly orders her to completely reject the crushing burden if she truly doesn't want to carry it. Yu passionately reminds the tiny girl that it is her own life, granting her the absolute freedom to forge her own destiny beyond her ancestors' tragic fate. Flashing a brilliantly confident, high-octane grin, Yu eagerly presents an incredibly optimistic alternative to her heavy dilemma. He cheerfully suggests they simply continue their grand expedition and actively search the vast world for other surviving Maori who can properly inherit the magic. Utterly stunned by his boundless optimism, Clara's eyes stretch wide in pure, unadulterated awe before she grips the ancient artifact with newly forged resolve. Radiating fierce determination, Clara confidently asks her trusted team to help her track down a worthy successor, to which they happily agree. Channeling his explosive culinary ambitions, Yu aggressively declares they are going to devour all the delicious food in the world while mastering ancient magic. Flashing a remarkably tender smile, Yu softly reminds the brave girl that her own missing mother might still be out there waiting, prompting Clara to excitedly urge her team to finally head home.